Good morning, esteemed colleagues, members of the committee, authors and sponsors of the bills for today's meeting, and to our invited guests and resource persons. Welcome to the first regular meeting of the Committee on Justice in the second regular session of the 18th Congress, and the first online committee meeting ever of this committee. Due to the present circumstances, we are constrained to conduct this meeting online. We have already sent out our guidelines for this meeting, and we hope that everyone has read the guidelines for a smooth and orderly online meeting today. Today, we will continue our deliberations of the bills restoring the death penalty in the Philippines. We had our initial discussions of the measures last September 24, 2019. Representatives Rogelio Pacquiao, Wesley Gatchalian, and Deputy Speaker Ferdinand Hernandez sponsored their bills, respectively. We also heard the comments and the position of our resource persons from the Public Attorney's Office, for PAO, Attorney Sylvester Mosin, Commissioner Karen Gomez-Dumpit from the Commission on Human Rights, and the Integrated Bar of the Philippines National President, Attorney Domingo Cayosa. We suspended the deliberations pending the submission of the position papers of resource persons and stakeholders. In the recent State of the Nation address of President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, he again reiterated his call for the reinstatement of the death penalty by lethal injection for crimes specified under the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002 or Republic Act 9165. This is in line with the President's commitment to the war against drugs currently being waged by the country. During the 17th Congress, we passed on third and final reading House Bill number 4727, which imposed the death penalty on certain crimes involving the illegal drugs. However, the Senate failed to pass a similar measure, and the proposal was shelved until the start of the 18th Congress. As of today, there are 12 bills pending before this committee proposing the imposition of death penalty on several crimes. Out of the 12 bills filed, 6 bills proposed the imposition of death penalty for violations of Republic Act 9165 or the Comprehensive Dangerous Drug Act. Only for violations of RA 9165. And they are House Bill 741, authored by Representative Rufy Biazon, House Bill 1380, authored by Representative Fidel Castro, House Bill 1806, authored by Representative Rogelio Pacquiao, House Bill 2092, authored by Deputy Speaker Raneo Abu, House Bill 3256, authored by Deputy Speaker Ferdinand Hernandez, and House Bill number 3261, authored by Representative Wesley Gatchalian. 3 bills also proposed the imposition of the death penalty for violations of 9165 and for certain crimes punishable under the revised penal code and other special penal laws. And they are House Bill 1588, authored by Minority Leader Bienvenido Advante, House Bill 3128, authored by Representative Doyle Lacson, House Bill 4743, authored by Representatives Eric Yap, Jocelyn Tulfo, Rowena Taduran. 2 bills also proposed the imposition of the death penalty for specific crimes, and they are House Bill 1800, authored by Representative Rogelio Pacquiao for kidnapping, House Bill number 1807, authored also by Representative Rogelio Pacquiao for aggravated rape. And finally, 1 bill, and this is House Bill number 2026, authored by Representative Robert H. Barbers, which proposes the repeal of Republic Act 9346, entitled an act prohibiting the imposition of the death penalty in the Philippines. The Secretariat has emailed to our members the matrix of these bills, as well as a summary matrix showing the crimes that each bill proposes to be punished by death. Please note that while 9 of these bills impose the death penalty for violations of RA 9165, which was the call of President Duterte during his SONA, they differ in certain drug-related crimes that are to be punished by death. Kindly refer to the summary matrix for an overview of these provisions. There are also 2 notable exceptions. House Bill number 1806 of Representative Pacquiao, raising the threshold amount of possession under Section 11 to 500 grams of marijuana, which may be punished by death, while House Bill number 3261 of Representative Gatchalian proposes that importation, sale, and possession of 1,000 grams of marijuana and shabu and 200 grams of the other types of drugs should merit the death penalty. House Bill 3261 therefore also raises threshold amounts for importation, sale, and possession of dangerous drugs and their corresponding penalties of imprisonment. Kindly refer to the matrix of the bills sent by our Secretariat starting at page 36. We should also note that these bills also differ on the modes of execution. Some bills propose lethal injection as the sole mode, while others propose death by hanging, firing squad, and lethal injections as modes for their execution. There are several other nuances in these bills, and we hoped we could hear from our esteemed authors their proposals, considering that the President said in his SONA last week. On a side note, the Chair received on Monday a letter from Representative Rufy Biazon seeking the exclusion of his bill, House Bill number 741, from today's agenda. If Representative Biazon is present at this meeting, we will ask him later today before the committee's request. After hearing from the authors, we will acknowledge our resource persons who have not yet stated their positions before the committee. The DOJ and the PNP have already submitted their position papers, and we have invited the representatives to be present and present their position before the committee today. Additionally, upon the request of some of our members, we have our other invited guests, namely Bishop Broderick Pabilio of the Archdiocese of Manila, Attorney Chel Jokno, the Free Legal Assistance Group, or FLAG, Attorney Nery Colmenares of the National Union of People's Lawyers, and Mr. Jigs Clamor of Karapatan. For members who wish to interpolate and debate, please send a message to our COMSEC through text or through the Zoom chat in order to be included in the papers. I suggest and I caution the resource persons that because of time constraint, we will have to limit their oral presentation to 3 minutes without prejudice to the submission of position papers in writing, which after all will be distributed to the members of the committee. The floor will be open for interpellations and debate after we have heard from our resource persons. COMSEC, at this point, the committee secretary is directed to acknowledge the presence of our regular and ex officio members, the authors of the bills, calendar for today's meeting, as well as our invited guests and resource persons. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, resource persons.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, COMSEC.
Mr. Chair, before that, I have a housekeeping question.
Monte.
Mr. Chair, yes. Leading up to this committee hearing, Mr. Chair, I was led to understand that several members of the staff of the Justice Committee are unavailable because they are on self-quarantine. I would just like to inquire from the COMSEC, as to their staffing capability now. And likewise, I would like to commend the Secretariat na despite yung limitations given yung COVID, at ang understanding ko ay pilay sila, they are still continuing with this hearing, Mr. Chair. Parang kanina, parang isa lang ang support staff ni COMSEC. Tama po ba yun, Mr. Chair?
Your Honor,
COMSEC, will you respond?
thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. Your Honor, we have only one staff member who is under home quarantine. She tested positive last July, but upon reconfirmation, after her quarantine, she tested negative. So all five of the rest of the staff of our committee are present here today, Your Honor. Thank you for the concern, sir.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
To the members, good morning again. Of the following the following members of the Committee on Justice, the Honor and ex officio and members of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Chairperson Vicente Veloso, the Honorable Representatives Rafi Biason, Robert Ace Barbers, Argel Kabatbat, Carlos Zarate, Femio Colyaman, D.V. Savellano, Jose Christopher Belmonte, Pablo John Garcia, Ramon Nolasco Jr., Nina Taduran, Your Honor. For the resource persons, Your Honor, we have here present today.
COMSEC present, Congressman Gatchalian.
The committee also acknowledges the presence of Honorable Wes Gatchalian. The
COMSEC.
Present
COMSEC.
Castro.
Honorable Franz Castro, Honorable Cabuchan,
COMSEC. Present.
Vice Chairperson Jonathan Flores, Your Honor. For the resource persons, we have from the Department of Justice, Assistant Secretary Nicolas T. From the Public Attorney's Office, the Chief Public Attorney, Presida Rueda Acosta. From the Philippine National Police, we have Police Brigadier General Antonio Bartolome, Police Brigadier General Ildebranis Usana, Police Brigadier General Matthew Bakay, and Police Brigadier General Benjamin Villasis Jr. From the Commission on Human Rights, we have Commissioner Karen Gomez Dumpit, who requests that she be acknowledged as the first resource person to speak since she has another meeting at 11 a.m. And Director Attorney Francis Tom Temposa. From the IBP, we have the National President, Attorney Domingo Igon Cayosa. From the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, we have Bishop Ruel Norman Marigza. From the Free Legal Assistance Group, Attorney Jose Manuel Jokno. From the National Union of People's Lawyers, Attorney Nery Colmenares. Your Honor.
I saw from the Zoom Honorable Representative Rufi Biazon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the chair for the opportunity for my bill to be taken up, 741, for possible consolidation along with other bills of similar purpose. However, this representation would like to request that House Bill 741, which I filed in July 1, 2019, be excluded from the agenda for the following reasons. First, between the time I filed the bill in July 2019 and today, I have since taken the position that the government should strengthen its investigative and evidence-gathering capability as a prerequisite to the pursuit of the reimposition of death penalty. I took that position after learning about how successful prosecutions are done in the United States, where the use of single-party recording is authorized in gathering evidence of criminal activity, particularly in drug trafficking. Hence, I have filed House Bill number 5408, proposing to allow single-party recording in the investigation of terrorism and illegal drugs cases. I believe that this investigation tool will contribute to the strengthening of cases against drug traffickers, particularly those in the high levels of drug syndicates, and negate the argument that the innocent could become victims of injustice and be subject to capital punishment. And second, I have reservations on the timing of the tackling of the death penalty bills during the height of the pandemic. Government is still in the thick of a fight against the virus, which seems to be on an escalation. I believe that at this point, a contentious social issue such as death penalty may be an unnecessary distraction in the effort to consolidate public and private sector support and focus against the pandemic. A socially and politically divisive debate on death penalty will be detrimental to the heal as one mantra. The public expects Congress to give priority to measures that directly address the public health emergency we are currently facing. And third, considering that this measure will elicit a passionate and intense debate as it has undergone in the past, the same is expected for these current measures. And rightfully so, since it involves granting the state the authority to take the life of a person, and it goes to the very core of the people's values, beliefs, and sense of justice. As such, I believe that the venue for discussing that policy should not be constrained, which, in my view, is the environment provided by the online proceedings that we have been experiencing during the COVID-19 pandemic. Starting from my very first term in the 12th Congress, I have consistently pursued legislation proposing the imposition of capital punishment, particularly for the high-level drug traffickers. I remain in that belief because I think it is the appropriate and commensurate penalty for those who benefit from the ruin, misery, and death in people's lives. However, I also believe that there's a timing for everything, even in legislation. With 2 more years remaining in the mandate of the 18th Congress and the term of the President, I believe there is still time for consideration of the bill after the pandemic has been placed under control or has died down. So I beg the understanding of my colleagues if I have taken this position of requesting the exclusion of my bill from the agenda of this committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity.
So, if I get it right, you're only asking, as per your letter, second paragraph, that House Bill 741 be excluded from the agenda, meaning consideration of House Bill 741 will be deferred. Is that correct, Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and the consequence would be I would not be included in the list of authors in any consolidated measure of all these bills, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. May we have now Honorable Labante, Minority Leader.
Your Honor, I received a message from the staff of Minority Leader Benjamin Nabante. He's still in the plenary, also sponsoring in the Public Accounts Committee, Your Honor.
Okay, so that being the case, we now have to hear from authors, sponsors of bills who have not heard yet in this committee. And may we hear from Honorable Representative Fred Castro. Next will be Representative Robert H. Barbers, then Deputy Speaker Rani Abu. Next is Representative Doyle Yachon, then Representative Wesley Gatchalian, and also Representatives Eric Goyap, Jocelyn Tulfo, and Rowena Laduran, in that order, if possible. Honorable Fred Castro.
Your Honor, the Honorable Fred Castro is not yet in the meeting room.
Okay, there's a request. Muna daw si Chairman Ace Barbers. Chairman Barbers.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So,
Okay. Yeah, you may proceed, Your Honor.
thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also in the other Zoom meeting in the Public Accounts Committee. Let me just, okay, mute this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Honorable Chair, distinguished colleagues, last Congress, I filed a similar bill proposing the reimposition of the death penalty. It was consolidated with the other similar bills and eventually passed on third and final reading. That version of the House was confined to what we call drug-related crimes. Unfortunately, it got stalled in the Senate. Mr. Chair, I am for death penalty no matter who our president is. I believe that this is the only penalty that will bring shivers to the bones of the evildoers, the only deterrent to the commission of heinous crimes, the only thing that even the most hardened criminals fear. We never had a chance to prove this aspect. How could we? With only 2 executions without relations to drugs or non-drug related crimes, what data can we gather and study? All studies being presented to the effect that the death penalty is not a deterrent are all foreign studies. We have our own culture which affects and molds our well-being. So the studies of other cultures cannot apply to us. The argument also that this penalty will only apply to poor people who cannot get the best lawyers is terribly flawed too. Lawyers are not the only ones inside the courtroom. There are judges who see and observe the trial and who can propound questions to witnesses and can control the pace and direction of the trial to see to it that justice is served. The law provides that if the accused cannot afford a lawyer, the judge can even appoint one for him. Now, the public attorney's office is there. Are we saying that the taxes of the people are wasted in this office and we are giving employment to ignorant and incompetent lawyers who know nothing but to have their indigent clients plead guilty? And even a plea of guilty is not enough to sustain a conviction. The prosecution must prove its case and the guilt of the accused. This is what we call justice. Flawed justice system, some may say. Utopia does not exist on earth. There is no perfect justice system. There is no such thing. Even the most developed countries do not have it. Ironically, those who have the best justice systems are the first world countries, of whom most of which do not impose the death penalty, either by law or by practice. An imperfect system should not deter or stop the government from doing what is best for its people. It is through firm and decisive actions that the system gets better. Corrupt policemen, prosecutors, judges, and justices, they comprise the corrupt justice system, so they say. Are we saying that this is all right to have the life imprisonment stay on as the capital punishment because the system is flawed and the people running it are corrupt? So it is all right to sentence people with life imprisonment even if those people in the justice system are corrupt? And it is all right that they are corrupt as long as there is no death penalty? So when will we address this corruption? Those against the death penalty always brings this to the fore every time the topic is discussed. From the time the death penalty was suspended in 2007, are they saying that they did not do anything to improve the justice system? Because up to now, this is still the argument. From the time it was revived in 1993 up to now, their argument has not changed. The corrupt policemen, prosecutors, judges, and justices that they were referring to in 1993 were already either dead or retired. So what corrupt system are they now referring to? Ironically, some of the people who are saying this are government officials themselves who have been in government for so long. Are they not supposed to have made the system better and better while they were there? It is fine coming from people who are not in the government service because it could be just a perception. But coming from government officials, elected officials at that is quite incredible. You do not trust the government and the system that you helped create. Some of them even had their friends and relatives appointed as prosecutors, judges, and justices, or promoted as officers of the police force. If they are now saying that these people are corrupt, they are also partly to blame. Are we not supposed to make sure that the system is incorruptible? What is their basis? They are supposed to help government cleanse the system. They should identify these people and prosecute them in order to have a perfect, so-called perfect justice system. Some people are also saying that we cannot reimpose death penalty because we have an international commitment to abolish the death penalty. That if we reimpose it, we will violate treaties and other international agreements, and we can be sanctioned. Mr. Chairman, the last time I checked, we are still a sovereign nation. Last time I checked too, our constitution allows the death penalty. For me, it is simple. A sovereign nation can do as it pleases in order to preserve peace and order in its society. No other nation can dictate how it runs its own government. As long as it does not interfere in the affairs of other nations, as long as it does not cause injury to other nations, it is free to chart its own destiny. No sovereign nation deserves to be bullied and made to govern while being threatened constantly with the proverbial sword of Damocles by other nations which do not share its beliefs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. May now hear from Minority Leader Abante. Your Honor, please. Comsec, Honorable Abante.
Siguro dito tayo magkakaproblema because
In the meeting room, but he's not yet.
we stop.
Maybe we can proceed, Your Honor, with Deputy Speaker Abu. He's already.
Set up. Diyan po nagsimula.
Okay, so, sino? Deputy Speaker Abu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair,
Yes, Your Honor.
thank you very much. Let my explanatory note be my sponsorship speech, Mr. Chair.
The explanatory note of the Honorable Abu
Shall be the
is now
shall be the
adopted as his
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
sponsorship.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Your Honor is the Honorable Wesley Gatchalian.
Comsec, who will be next?
The Honorable Gatchalian, Your Honor. Honorable Wes Gatchalian.
Okay, Honorable Gatchalian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to my colleagues. Good morning to our fellow resource persons and our guests this morning. Mr. Chair, I want to save the time of the committee by not reading the whole explanatory note. I just want it to be registered as my sponsorship speech. But if you may allow, I just want to read maybe one paragraph that I think is quite important in the essence of my House Bill, which is House Bill 3261. So, Mr. Chair, this bill imposes death penalty for those convicted for proliferating dangerous drug trafficking, including but not limited to sale, trade, administration, possess, dispensation, delivery, distribution, and transportation. It also increases the penalties and fines for other acts such as importation and manufacturing. Another innovation of this bill is the increased quantity of dangerous drugs required to be possessed to avoid the problem of planting evidence on innocent citizens. Mr. Chair, as well as to my colleagues, I think ang pinaka malalim po na aspeto dito, of course, is the moral issue. But aside from the moral issue, I think my House Bill, which is House Bill 3261, emphasizes on the importance of trust, the element of trust. Karamihan po ng publiko, pinag-uusapan po ito, karamihan po ay for, karamihan ay hindi ho. It's basically sa mga nakausap ko po at based on sa ating research po, ang mga tao ho o kababayan natin na against measures such as the death penalty ay mainly, pag tinanong niya yung rason, is mainly because of the elements of trust. That they don't trust our police, they don't trust our military, they don't trust our government official in being transparent. Kaya ho, lumalabas palagi ang issue of planting of evidence on innocent citizens. So, Mr. Chair, I hope that when we tackle this committee, ito is something na we could give importance, no? How to regain the trust to the public people. And that's why in my bill, I propose that the quantity, no? For example, na lang po, sa shabu, from 50 grams, we increase that to 1,000 grams. For marijuana, from 500 grams, we increase that to 10,000 grams, no? And from cocaine, 10 grams, we increase that to 200 grams, no? So, ang ibig sabihin po nito ay ika nga commercial quantity po. Tayo po ay kikilos, ang tao po ay mapagbibigyan po ng penalty such as death penalty kung ito po ay malaki na po ang transaction nila at commercial quantity na po ang transaction nila. So, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope for the support of the committee as well as my fellow members in the approval of House Bill 3261 and likewise the similar bills filed by my colleagues. Thank you.
Who will be next? Comsec?
Your Honor, the minority leader is already present and ready, Your Honor.
Honorable
The Honorable Minority Leader, Bienvenido Abante, Your Honor.
Okay. Honorable Abante, our minority leader. You have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity that I have to be able to explain House Bill number 1588, an act imposing a death penalty for specific crimes, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 9364, entitled An Act Prohibiting the Imposition of the Death Penalty in the Philippines. Further amending Act number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, and Republic Act number 7080, entitled An Act Defining and Penalizing the Crime of Plunder, and amending Republic Act number 9165, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, Republic Act number 8177, entitled An Act Designating Death by Lethal Injection, and other penal laws. Mr. Chair, my colleagues, on the heels of his SONA delivered last July 27, 2020, our President reiterated his request for the passage of a bill reviving the death penalty for crimes specified under the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002. The Committee on Justice, as chaired by Honorable Vicente Ching S.E. Veloso III of the 3rd District of Leyte, heeded the call and placed House Bill number 1588, humbly authored by this representation, together with other bills of the same subject, under consideration. Chairman Veloso of the Committee on Justice, my dear colleagues, my beloved countrymen, I am for the death penalty. This is an advocacy I took up, as I quote, in defense of human life, honor and dignity, preservation of peace and order in society, and respect for law and authority. End of quote. The death penalty is a right given to the state to correct a heinous wrong that has been committed not only against the victim, but against the state and society. A person who commits a heinous crime exhibits a depravity that forfeits his very existence in this society. The right to life and a death penalty has been discussed side by side since the beginning of time. History and religion had, time and again, allowed the imposition. The Holy Writ tells us about the principle of sowing and reaping, as well as the injunction on justice, as borne by the following passage. And I quote, "And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life." Exodus 21:23. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Exodus 21:24. Burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Exodus 21:25. To recall, Mr. Chair, the death penalty was abolished on the primary argument that it is, number one, possible to commit error, and it affords no chance for rehabilitation. Number two, unfair in its administration. Number three, not a deterrent to the commission of crimes. Number four, cruel and costly. And number five, immoral. Mga kasama, mga kaibigan, mga kababayan, to these arguments, I beg to disagree. And here are the reasons. Number one, the death penalty proceeds from justice, not rehabilitation, in behalf of the state and innocent victims. I would submit that there is no more chance of rehabilitation of the convict, as the state will take his life. I would also submit that they are entitled to human rights. To those who uses this argument, I ask, how about the innocent victims who lost their human right to live and to use and enjoy their God-given gifts and freedom, and to enjoy the blessings of God, of democracy, and of a peaceful and orderly society? The reimposition of a death penalty proceeds from justice and not rehabilitation because of the depravity of the act on innocent victims. May babalik po ba ang kanilang mga buhay o ang kanilang matinong pag-iisip? Pagkikinabangan pa ba sila ng ating lipunan? Ginusto ba nila na sila ay maging biktima ng mga karumal-dumal na mga krimen? At human rights po ba ang isang tao ang gumawa, magtulak, magbenta o gumamit ng ipinagbabawal na gamot na magtutulak sa isang tao upang pumatay, magnakaw o gumahasa, kahit anong edad ang biktima, o magwasak ng pamilya, ng tahanan at lipunan? The prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament said, and I quote, "Let favor be showed to the wicked, yet will he not learn righteousness in the land of uprightness. Will he deal unjustly and will not behold the majesty of the Lord." End of quote. When one murders, massacres, or kidnaps innocent persons, robs or rapes or manufactures or distributes dangerous drugs that destroy the human assets of society, he strips himself of his so-called human rights. He forfeits his right to live. Number two, the imposition of a death penalty is the end result and fair administration of justice. The death penalty is fair in its administration and the commission of error, if any there be, is minimal. Existing laws, rules, and regulations, both substantive and procedural, afford adequate safeguards to a person accused of a crime. more so when the impossible penalty is death. He is guaranteed the right to appeal from the trial court up to the Supreme Court and until the office of the president. Thus, the sufficiency of opportunity to correct any error that may have been committed. The apprehension of error is but minimal and is not without solution, which I submit is the improvement of our judicial system and the quality and integrity of our judges and law enforcers, not to throw the death penalty away. Number 3, the death penalty is a deterrent. If God did not see the death penalty as a deterrent, and if he did not consider death penalty as right for the good of men in society, he would not have instituted it. Let me be clear on this, and let us not be misled. God, not man, instituted the death penalty for the good of mankind. If God, who created man, saw it right to impose a death penalty, who is man to consider it otherwise? If kidnappers, hijackers, murderers, robbers, rapists, drug lords, and drug pushers are executed and there is no deterrent effect, at least they have been eliminated, hence prevented from further committing heinous crimes. If they are not executed, they are given another chance to commit such heinous crimes. If in our times we consider that death penalty is not a deterrent, it is like what King Solomon has said, and I quote, "Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily." End of quote. Delayed execution of penalty, Mr. Chair, my colleagues, tends to induce more wrongdoings. We are living witnesses to the case of convicted drug lords, drug pushers, drug traffickers, who while inside the National Penitentiary with the government spending much needed public funds for their food, shelter, safety, health, and security, continue with their illegal and immoral trade, resulting in the further commission of heinous crimes and the destruction especially of our youth who are supposed to be the hope of our fatherland. Mga kasama, mga kaibigan, mga kababayan, gumising na po tayo sa katotohanan. Huwag na po nating hintayin na dumating ang panahon ng ang ating bansa, ang ating mga tahanan at mga pamilya, ang ating lipunan ay tuluyan ng mawasak at maging walang silbi sa harapan ng Diyos at ng mundo. Kung may death penalty, tapos na po lahat ito. Number 4, the death penalty is not cruel, neither costly. Punishment is cruel when it is something inhuman, barbarous, something more than extinguishment of life. With the abolition of the death penalty, an honest and hardworking taxpayer has to pay tax to support murderers, robbers, rapists, kidnappers, hijackers, plunderers, drug lords, drug pushers, etc. in prison. Executing these barbaric, inhuman, beastly criminals would save the people in society the cost and responsibility for their upkeep. Our president is suggesting execution of a death penalty by lethal injection. I ask, is death by lethal injection more cruel than the biblical form of death penalty, which is by stoning? For example, like in Leviticus, for the crimes of mere adultery, is stoning. For cursing, dishonoring parents, is stoning. Mas cruel pa ba ang lethal injection sa ginagamit po ng France nung araw na guillotine? Mas cruel pa ba ang lethal injection sa ginagamit na death penalty ng mga Romano na death on the cross? How much is the cost of administering lethal injection upon a convict? How much does the government spend for one convict serving life sentence or reclusion perpetua in prison, how much is lost because of the death or destroyed life or family of just one victim of a convict? I submit that the death penalty is not cruel, neither is it costly. Number 5, the death penalty is not immoral. God himself instituted the death penalty. In the Old Testament, examples are the crimes of murder in Exodus 21:12, parricide, Exodus 21:15, kidnapping, Exodus 21:16, cursing of parents, even cursing of parents, Mr. Chair, Exodus 21:17, and adultery. Just imagine, even adultery in Leviticus 20 and verse number 10. This representation humbly submits that a death penalty has the effect of annihilating a wrong that annihilates a right. A person who commits a heinous crime exhibits his depravity. Hence, the only useful purpose which his life could serve to society is for society to make his life as an example for the application of the death penalty. The death penalty serves the twofold ends of criminal legislation, which are the prevention of a repetition of the offense committed and a warning to others similarly included or inclined. Society must protect itself against an enemy by taking his life in retribution for his offense and as an example and warning to others. And lastly, the murderers, the robbers, the kidnappers, the hijackers, the rapists, the plunderers, drug lords, drug pushers, and other malefactors of the same brand should be branded with a stigma of infamy, they being the shame of a race, the ignominy of a people, a disgrace of humankind, hence should be erased from the face of society. My esteemed colleagues, Mr. Chair, now that we have the opportunity to do right for our country and our countrymen, let us enact this piece of legislation. Let us not wait for God to execute the death penalty himself. Maraming salamat po. Pagpalain po tayong lahat ng ating Panginoon.
Thank you, Honorable Minority Leader. Next is Honorable Representative Taduran.
Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Mr. Chairman, at sa ating STEAM colleagues. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I have the honor to sponsor House Bill number 4743. This is an act imposing the death penalty on certain heinous crimes, repealing for the purpose of Republic Act number 9346, entitled An Act Prohibiting the Imposition of Death Penalty in the Philippines, and amending Act number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code, and other special penal laws, jointly filed by ACT-CIS Party List Representatives Honorable Eric Goyap, Honorable Jocelyn Pua Tulfo, and myself. In recent times, conscience-less individuals have become more brazen in committing crimes because they know that they could get away with it. They will still live even if imprisoned. We have been receiving numerous reports of barbaric acts perpetrated against the most vulnerable in society. Children, women, the elderly, those who are incapable of defending themselves. Evildoers have been acting with impunity, confident that the worst penalty that they could suffer is life in prison. As the party list ng mga inaapi, we deem it our duty to propose a measure which aims to end to end this and protect the oppressed and exploited. Those who commit heinous crimes, as defined in this bill, do not deserve mercy and must suffer the consequences of their actions. We must prioritize the welfare of peace-loving people over the right to life of these monsters. We believe that the reimposition of the death penalty will deter the commission of heinous crimes. The certainty of death will no doubt create second thoughts in the minds of potential criminals. To end, this bill seeks to impose the death penalty for crimes which defy morals, challenge justice, and create chaos in our society. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chair, at magandang umaga po.
Thank you. We now will be proceeding to hear our resource persons. The first online is Commissioner Karen Dumpit, but we will have first 2 minutes suspension. Momsek, 2 minutes. Meeting is, sino ba yan? Si Chana. Meeting is resumed. May we now hear CHR Commissioner Karen Dumpit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Your Honors. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Of course, thank you again for this another opportunity to be able to share the Commission's position on the issue of the reintroduction of the death penalty. We have been asked to, of course, concentrate on the relevant international human rights instruments against the death penalty. Of course, we begin with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So if we take a look at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, we have ratified this on October 23, 1986. And it brings us to Article 6, where it says that every human being has the inherent right to life, and that this right shall be protected by law, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his right. Just to say that, of course, the Human Rights Committee in charge of monitoring this particular treaty, in its general comment number 36, states that Article 6, Paragraph 2, which contains the obligation where countries have not abolished the death penalty, sentence of death may be imposed only for the most serious of crimes. It says here that it recognizes and protects the right to life of all human beings where no derogation is permitted, even in situations of armed conflict and other public emergencies which threaten the life of a nation. It is a fundamental right whose effective protection is a prerequisite for the enjoyment of all other human rights. So just to say that upon the ICCPR's ratification in 1986 and together with the 1987 Constitution abolishing the death penalty, we were already barred from reintroducing this particular measure because of the progressive obligation that we have as a state party to the ICCPR. So in short, in 1993, with the passage of 9346, we reintroduced the death penalty. We already violated this progressive obligation to maintain the abolitionist stand of the 1987 Constitution. I now proceed to the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, which we ratified on November 20, 2007. And it has a twofold obligation. The first is we have committed ourselves not to execute anyone within our jurisdiction, and that we will take all necessary measures to abolish the death penalty within our in this case, Your Honors, penalty prior to our ratification of the second optional protocol because of the 1987 Constitution and because of the passage of RA 9346. With our ratification, the Philippines is under obligation to respect and fulfill these two commitments in the second optional protocol. So just to say that the Human Rights Committee also in its general comment said that like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the second optional protocol does not contain any termination provisions and the state parties cannot denounce it. Abolition of the death penalty is therefore legally irrevocable, and furthermore, states parties may not transform an offense which upon ratification of the covenant or at any time thereafter did not entail the death penalty into a capital offense. I now proceed to the withdrawal or the withdrawal of proposals to withdraw from the Philippines ICCPR second optional protocol. So with this, the Commission believes that with the enactment of RA 9346, prohibiting the imposition of the death penalty, the Senate is deemed to have concurred with the ratification of the second optional protocol. Congress then had overwhelmingly supported the abolition of the death penalty with a total of 120 votes in the House and a total of 16 votes in the Senate. The total number of votes that allowed for the passage of 9346 is therefore meets the required 2/3 vote of all members of the Senate, and it involves the entire Congress. The instrument is also deemed ratified when it was deposited in the United Nations on November 20, 2007. Given that the UN has accepted our instrument and deemed our act as a ratification, we must emphasize that there is a continuing obligation of the state to fulfill its commitments under international law. A change of government does not permit withdrawal. This is the doctrine of continuity of obligations. In our case, there is no change of government, but a change of administration. If in a change of government you are not allowed, what more if it is just a change of administration? Just to also reiterate that in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, particularly on the termination of treaties, Articles 46, Paragraph 2, Articles 54, Article 56, Paragraph 1, the provision to terminate a treaty must be included within the treaty for it to apply. In this case, there is no opt-out provision in both treaties that I have mentioned, Iccpr, as well as the second optional protocol to the Iccpr. And then we proceed, of course, to the Philippines being a state party to international treaties that are inconsistent with the death penalty for narcotic offenses. And I mentioned 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs and the 1988 United Nations Convention against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. In these, the provisions of these conventions actually have this particular formulation that punishable offenses when committed intentionally and that serious offenses shall be liable to adequate punishment, particularly only by imprisonment or other penalties of deprivation of liberty. That is in the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. The similar or a similar formulation is found in the 1988 Convention, which refers to imprisonment, deprivation of liberty, pecuniary pecuniary sanctions, and confiscations, which appear of the United Nations Convention against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. So in any event, there is an obligation under customary international law to move towards abolition, and that obligation is inconsistent with the reimposition of the death penalty. I proceed now to, of course, the Convention Against Torture, and we believe that the death penalty is the utmost form of torture. We have already enacted an Anti-Torture Act to implement the Convention Against Torture. And under this Act of 2009, it is considered torture when there is use of psychoactive drugs to change the perception, memory, alertness, or will of a person, such as the use of drugs to induce in extreme pain. To illustrate, we also raise the issue of botched executions, which occur when there is a breakdown in or departure from the protocol for a particular method of execution. The protocol can be established by the norms, expectations, and advertised virtues of each methods or by the government's officially adopted execution guidelines. Examples include being administered wrong dosages of specific drugs for lethal injections. Sometimes allergies caused by these drugs can also trigger severe pain, and instead of a quickness, painless, and I'm putting it in quotes, as methods. So I now proceed to international human rights instruments supporting the abolition of the death penalty. And these include the voting patterns of the... Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Commissioner, how long will it take you to finish your
3 more minutes.
position?
I'm in my last 3 more minutes, sir. I'll be quicker.
3 minutes nga lang ang binibigay natin sa lahat ng resource persons eh. So, anyway, sige, because I understand you're to leave by 11.
Apo.
Sige, can you abbreviate, please, your presentation?
Yes, I will, sir. So the voting patterns of the Philippines in the UN General Assembly and the Human Rights Council, we have consistently in the 10 resolutions over the many years, from 2007 to the present, we have consistently voted in favor of moratoriums on the death penalty, except on the last three resolutions on the moratorium in December 2016, October 2017, and December 2018, where we have abstained on the resolution. And the last po is the repercussions on the death penalty or the reintroduction of the death penalty. So just to say that there are repercussions, particularly on OFWs on death row. If death penalty is reinstated, the ability of the DFA to negotiate on behalf of our OFWs will be undermined. And moreover, our country will be considered as hypocritical if we reimpose the death penalty in our country, but at the same time seek the lives of our OFWs who are in death row abroad. Second, of course, is the confidence of the Philippines as a member of an international, of the international community, where we have been considered at the forefront of the promotion and protection of human rights. With international treaties that we have signed, the reinstatement will amount to a violation of many international agreements we have signed, and which will not only affect our economy, but also our dealings with the international community. There will also be difficulty in cooperation on dealing with transnational crimes. And second to the last point, Your Honor, the reinstatement of the death penalty will cause the withdrawal of benefits, or may cause the withdrawal of benefits we are enjoying under the generalized scheme of Preference Plus, which is a trade agreement that has been signed with the European Union. And under this scheme, the Philippines export products to the EU, we enjoy zero tariff benefits. And previous reports on the assessment of GSP Plus has stated that the reintroduction of the death penalty would be a major step backwards and raise questions regarding the Philippines' international commitments. And this was reiterated in the most recent assessment released in February 2020 by the EU. The joint report to the EU, or the European Parliament and Council, states that preserved tuna is highlighted as a product which has particularly benefited from the growth in Philippine exports to the EU market under GSP+. Preparations of food and fish comprise around 12.5% of the Philippine GSP exports to the European Union. And if the Philippines loses its GSP Plus status, tuna exporters would be required to pay 20.5% tariffs. And in 2018, EU imported about 1.9 billion euros worth of Philippine products under the GSP trade preference. Other products that will be affected are coconut oil, pineapple products, footwear, optical products, and electrical machinery. At this point in time that we are in a pandemic, we want to emphasize that we cannot afford the repercussions that the reinstatement of the death penalty will cause. So just as a last note, Your Honor, the death penalty is a false promise. It is an utmost form of torture and can only bring counterproductive effects in our efforts to curb and punish crimes. Maraming pong salamat. Naka-mute po kayo.
Naka-mute po. Chair.
Okay, hello? Okay na? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Okay na? Let me go back to Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. The Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land. When we say general accepted principles of international law, we bear in mind its general acceptance really by the nations. In Asia, I note that it's only the Philippines that has no death penalty. Additionally, Russia, China, US, they also impose death penalty. But more disturbing is your observation that there has only been a change in administration, and with the ratification of the international covenant by the Senate, Congress is no longer empowered or no longer has the power to pass this death penalty law. But let me read Section 19, Article 3. Excessive fines shall not be imposed, nor cruel, degrading, or inhuman punishment inflicted. Neither shall the death penalty be imposed unless, for compelling reasons involving heinous crimes, the Congress hereafter provides for it. In my understanding of Congress, we have 17th, we have 18th, and we have past and future Congresses. It is not a plain case of change of administration that would bar us from exercising the powers of legislation. Here, death penalty is a proper subject for deliberation and enactment by Congress. What can you say to that, Commissioner Dumpit? The 2 points.
Thank you, Your Honor. What we have just presented, of course, is in demonstration of our role to recommend to Congress effective measures to implement human rights and to be able to monitor compliance with international human rights standards and treaties, Your Honor. So in that respect, what we are trying to say is that even if we go ahead and reimpose the death penalty or reintroduce the death penalty, we will be found to be in serious breach of international law. Nevertheless, we will international law will not affect our bid to reintroduce the death penalty, and we will still be considered a state party, Your Honor. In respect of the continuing obligation, what we are trying to say is that there is a continuing obligation regardless of a change in administration. And what we are pointing out is that it is a state obligation to be able to comply with the human rights treaties and that we have acceded to or that we have ratified.
So, let me get you right. You're now admitting, Commissioner, that Congress has the power to pass the death penalty law. As provided in Section 19, Article 3 of the Constitution.
In the Constitution says for compelling reasons, Your Honor, and it is our position that there is no compelling reason to reintroduce the death penalty, Your Honor. It also confines to most serious of crimes, and most serious of crimes we have not been able to even reserve on our ratification. So most serious of crimes does not include imposition of the death penalty on illegal drugs, as I have mentioned also, mentioning the treaties that have been ratified by the Philippines on drugs, which I have mentioned earlier, Your Honor.
So we're now down to compelling reason, meaning in the matter of authority to pass the law, jurisdiction-wise, we now concede that Congress has the power to pass the death penalty law.
If it will be read, Your Honor, Section 2 on the provision of capital punishment, we cannot allow that because there is really no compelling reason to impose the death penalty.
But again, 2 things, compelling reason is one thing, the power to pass the law is another. Okay, anyway, let me go to another point. Can the International Covenant you cited amend the Constitution?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Your Honor. Could you kindly repeat the question? Nag-lag po.
Okay, we have the procedure on how to amend the Constitution. My question is the International Covenant, can it be taken as a mode of amending our Constitution? Speaking of Article 2, Section 2, and Section 19, Article 3 of the Constitution.
Can it be taken? No, we have to read them together, Your Honor. We have the Article of Incorporation. So we have to read them together, and in interpreting the Constitution, we must be able to reconcile all these provisions that seem to be countering one another. But we are of the position that we are riding on our obligations, where we have committed to in perpetuity by virtue of ratifying the second optional protocol, not to reimpose or reintroduce the death penalty. And the second is not to be able to execute under our jurisdiction. So those are the two obligations. It's also found in our Constitution by virtue of the Article of Incorporation.
So two things are settled. Number one, we have the authority, the power to pass the death penalty law. And number two, we can entertain your objections under the so-called compelling reasons clause in Section 19, Article 3 of the Constitution. A lot of our colleagues can actually support your position, and we are, in fact, intending to hear them. That's the reason why we have this committee meeting. But
Mr. Chair.
it is okay. Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair.
Minority Leader Abante.
I'm just interested to find out what are the compelling reasons that Commissioner Karen's talking about that would compel us to pass that penalty. What should be the compelling reasons?
That would deter us from...
But that would allow us to pass that penalty because he spoke about compelling reasons. So it means that the drug menace that we have today is not a compelling reason.
There is no compelling reason, Your Honor, and to say that there is a provision in the Constitution, of course, that says heinous crimes, and we equate that to most serious of crimes. And in the most serious of crimes in international law, if you will have a listing of that, drugs is not found in those lists, Your Honor. So we believe that there is no compelling reason to impose the death penalty.
Well, in that regard, Commissioner Dumpit, again, it is for Congress to appreciate these compelling reasons and for the President to veto it or approve whatever Congress will pass. But going back, because I was really disturbed by your proposition that we have no power to pass this law in the light of the international covenant, especially we said that there has been only a change in administration, but not in the power of Congress to pass legislation, because we are divided into several Congresses. We had 17th Congress, we are now in 18th Congress. We can repeal, modify, and pass any law as long as it is not unconstitutional. That's why I brought to fore the question of whether or not the International Covenant has effectively amended the Constitution, noting that Article 17 of our Constitution laid down the procedure by which we can amend the Constitution. That being the case, is there any other interpolation from our colleagues, members?
Sir, Honorable Belmonte is raising his hand.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Okay, we have DOJ ASIC Assistant Secretary Nikki T.
Mr. Chair? Just one quick question, Mr. Chair.
May we hear from Honorable Belmonte, Assistant Minority Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Maikling lang po. Lagi po kasing ginagamit ng gobyerno, of which the CHR is part, ng executive, yung international obligations natin. In fact, nung pinag-uusapan natin, pinagdedebatihan po natin ang anti-terror law na naging batas ngayon, ang number one na reason, one of the main reasons kaya natin implement yon is magiging in default tayo of international obligations. While I do not dispute our sovereign right to enact our own laws, parang inconsistent naman tayo ngayon. In one hand, sabi nila, kailangan natin, hindi tayo pwede maging in default sa international obligations natin, kaya kailangan natin ipasa yung anti-terror law. Pero dito, sa death pen, sa mga international conventions na pinirmahan din po natin, and magiging in default tayo at magkakaroon din po tayo ng penalties, hindi ho applicable yung argument ng international obligations po natin. Maaari ho bang ma-enlighten lang ako dito sa ano yung differences? Bakit in one hand pwede obliged tayo, on the other hand hindi tayo obliged? Mr. Chair, Your Honor. Maybe the CHR may help us here.
Commissioner Lumpit.
Well, of course, no. We can say that the obligation is deemed incorporated because of the incorporation clause, and treaties are part of the law of the land. So, sa akin po, wala pong sa amin po sa commission is we have to respect our commitments. And we don't operate just on our own. We live in a world where we face the international community, and we say that we are a responsible member of the international community. And this is actually part of our obligation. In fact, it's part of our constitutional obligation by virtue of the Article of Incorporation Clause. So it does not mean that because by the very act of Congress also in passing the act of prohibiting the imposition of the death penalty, it has become a basis now for the Philippines to ratify the second optional protocol, Your Honor. And in that case, just to say that if we do reintroduce this measure, we will be found to be in serious breach of our international obligations, Your Honor.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Your Honor. Honorable Rodriguez.
Thank you and good noon, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to propound some questions to Commissioner Dumpit, if I may, with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Your Honor.
To Commissioner Dumpit, do you agree that if we impose the death penalty, we will violate Section 2, Article 2 of the Constitution, which says that the Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law? Do you believe that this will be in violation of that provision?
Yes, Your Honor. It will be.
And the reason for that is because, as you have said, we are signatories to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, especially its second protocol, which really commits our country not to execute in our jurisdiction any of our detainees or convicted persons. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And in fact, we have ratified the second protocol, and this is through the Senate deeming to ratify it when we passed Republic Act 9346 on prohibiting the imposition of the death penalty. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So therefore, first violation of the death penalty is the violation of our Declaration of State Principles, Article 2. The second question, Madam Commissioner, is do you believe that the provisions of our Constitution on Article 3, the Bill of Rights, Section 19, which says that we cannot impose cruel, degrading, and inhuman punishment cannot be inflicted. Does the CHR believe that the reimposition of death penalty will be in violation of Section 19 of Article 19, Section 1 of Article 3 of the Bill of Rights?
Yes, Your Honor. Torture is absolutely proscribed. No country in the world will say that they are inflicting torture, Your Honor. So it's an international norm. So yes, Your Honor.
So you're saying first, death penalty is a cruel infliction on people of the Philippines.
Yes, Your Honor.
You are saying also that death penalty is a degrading infliction on those convicted. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. Because how can we demonstrate that killing is wrong when we kill ourselves?
Okay. Then you're also saying that punishing our convicted persons by death will certainly be an inhuman punishment because you get his life. And what can be more inhuman than getting a life of a Filipino? Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So we have now according to the CHR, two violations of our Constitution. To repeat, number one, violation of our Declaration of Principles and State Policies, Section 2, Article 2. We adopt generally accepted principle of international law. And of course, have you not believed also that aside from this provision, the prohibition on death penalty has reached a level of customary international law?
Yes, Your
Is that
Honor.
correct?
Yes,
Because
Your Honor.
even 107 countries has in fact had already abolished death penalty. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. More than 2/3 of the world's countries, actually 142 countries, have abolished
142.
death penalty in practice. 142,
Yeah.
Your Honor.
Then therefore, it does not only is it a generally accepted principle of international law through these conventions, but even higher than these treatises is customary international law under our international law principles. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So if we are going to impose death penalty, then we therefore violate not only our Constitution because it adopts the generally accepted principles of international law, which are the treatises signed by many countries, but because we, our country, would violate customary international law, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, so that's the second point. The third point, the third constitutional violation if we impose the death penalty. Don't you agree that Section 19, Article 2 of Section 2 of Article 3, which states, this is now Section 2, Article 3, Section 19, Paragraph 2. The employment of physical, psychological, or degrading punishment against any detainee is prohibited. Is there a violation of our Congress if we will reimpose death penalty as provided for under Article 3, Section 19, Paragraph 2, which says we cannot employ physical, psychological, or degrading punishment against any detainee? Would that be your position of CHR?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. In other words, Mr. Chairman and our Commissioner, clearly the Constitution will be violated with the imposition of the death penalty. And that is why we were minded that we have to approve in 2006, 9346, prohibiting the imposition of the death penalty. Now, as to the question of the chairman, which is always profound, will these treatises will these treatises violate and therefore amend our Constitution? For example, the ICCR, the Iccpr, and the second protocol. Will these violate the Constitution? Answer, please, Commissioner. Will these treatises violate the Constitution? Or, in other words, are international treaties, can they amend the Constitution? That's the question of the chairman, which you said should be reconciled. But there has to be a direct answer. Is it not that international treaties cannot overrule our Constitution? It can never be that any international treaties cannot violate the Constitution. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Your Honor. They do not violate the Constitution.
Yes, because in fact, these treatises, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the second protocol, do not violate our Constitution, but in fact reinforces our Constitution.
It is
Because,
with our Constitution.
yes, because precisely our Constitution adopts them as part of the law of the land. So there is no conflict on this particular treaties that we have ratified and signed on this treaties, and that it in fact reinforces our Constitution. So now let us go now to my question. Of course, on the we are through with the constitutional provisions. Death penalty violates 3 constitutional provisions of our 1987 Constitution. My next question will be in international law. And of course, we have already established that these treaties are now part of the law of the land by incorporation under our state policies. You made mention of the ICCR and the Iccpr and the protocol. And very clearly, in this protocol, can you repeat the commitment of the Philippines in the second protocol, which, if we violate, will have great repercussions on our standing in our League of Nations, our United Nations, and the international community? What are our commitments there?
The commitments is number 1, no one within the jurisdiction of the state party to the present protocol shall be executed. The second is each state party shall take all necessary measures to abolish the death penalty within its jurisdiction.
In fact, through 9346, the second commitment had been complied with, correct? By abolishing death penalty in our country in 2006, correct?
Yes, actually, Your Honor, we have already complied with it when we ratified by plebiscite the 1987 Constitution, which has an abolitionist stand. We violated it when we reimposed the death penalty in 1993, but we corrected ourselves in 2007, I believe, in the 9346 prohibition of the death penalty. And when we ratified it in 2007, we are already compliant with the optional protocol, Your Honor.
Thank you for that lecture on history and the lecture on the ratification by our Constitution, which was voted in accordance with the case of Haviliana versus Executive Secretary. The voting of hands has already, in 1973, been able to approve the Constitution. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
There is an abolition in that particular 73 Constitution. Now, okay. Now, can you tell us again how our Senate has been able to ratify the second protocol? We're now talking of ratification. We can sign, but as long as we do not ratify, then the treaty, the convention, the protocol will not be implementable.
Your Honor, it was more than a concurrence of the Senate that has happened.
Yes.
It was RA 90 had 100 20 votes in the House of Representatives, and a total
Yes.
of 16 votes in the Senate, which is 2/3 of the Senate. So we are in that position that we said that it is more than a concurrence of the Senate because it is an act of Congress that prohibited the imposition of the death penalty, Your Honor.
Yes, the Constitution only requires the Senate by a vote of 2/3 to ratify international treaties, correct? And not only the Senate, but by passing the death penalty abolition law, it included the House of Representatives. That's what you're saying, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, a very big majority in the House of Representatives, which now some congressmen now would like to erase by pre-imposing the death penalty. Now, therefore, in this particular case, the Iccpr and its second protocol had clearly been ratified, more than ratified by our government, Senate, and in fact, with the concurrence of the House in this particular case. Let us now go to the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties governs treaties such as the Iccpr and also the second protocol and other conventions like the United Nations, the Convention on Narcotic Drugs and the Single Convention and the United Nations Convention on Illicit Travel of Narcotic Drugs. Now, you stated, and can you be able to emphasize this, that if you want to terminate the treaties by having death penalty again reimposed, practically we are terminating our obligations under the Iccpr and the second protocol. Is that correct?
Your Honor, I didn't get the last portion of your...
The death penalty, if we reimpose it, it would seem the effect will be a termination of our commitments under the treaties of the Iccpr and the second protocol. Is that correct?
The effect, Your Honor, is we will be in serious breach because international law will be unaffected by that, even
Yes.
if we reimpose it.
Yeah, going to this particular convention, if we wish to terminate in our obligations under the second protocol and the Iccpr, including the UN Convention of Illicit Travel of Narcotic Drugs and the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, they require that the termination, if you want to get out of it, these treatises must have opt-out provisions, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And very clearly, can you say, yes, Mr. Chairman?
The Commission texted me that Representatives Atienza and Franz Castro are waiting on the line. Your 5 minutes is up, Your Honor, with due respect.
We will end because, Mr. Chairman, this is a very big issue that concerns lives of Filipinos.
I know. That's why.
Some few more minutes, Mr. Chairman, so that we can.
No problem. Last 2 minutes. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Just like in basketball, we will dribble fast and shoot fast because you only have 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So,
Okay,
thank you. So let's proceed. Finally, so we don't have, because the questions are just short. It's the answer sometimes which are long. Do you therefore categorically state that in fact we cannot opt out of these treaties because there is no opt-out provision?
Yes, Your Honor. No opt-out.
So we cannot in any way terminate our ratification and our approval of these treaties. Now, you mentioned about the United Nations Convention of Illicit Travel of Drugs. You are saying that here in these two conventions which we are signatories, correct? There is therefore a commitment not to impose the death penalty because under this United Nations of Illicit Travel of Narcotic Drugs and the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, only imprisonment, only deprivation of liberty can be imposed, but no death penalty. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Going now to the repercussions. Clearly, you have established, and I agree, that the Philippine Constitution of 1987 will be grossly violated if we reimpose the death penalty. And these are Article 2, Section 2, Article 3, Sections 19, Paragraph 1, Section 2, Article 3, Section 19, Paragraph 2. We have also stated that this will be a gross violation of international law. Iccpr, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Second Protocol, the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, and the United Nations Convention on Illicit Travel of Narcotic Drugs. This will all be violated. So the repercussion will be, first, certainly we will become a rogue state, correct? Because we do not follow the customary international law. We don't even follow our constitution by not making it as part of the law of the land and violating it. Do you agree that we will become a rogue state in the community of nations?
Yes, we will not be trusted, Your Honor.
Yes. And in fact, this will mean that we do not follow what we have committed. We have not followed customary international law, and we are violating the generally accepted principles of international law incorporated in the Constitution. Don't you agree?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Now, the other repercussion is that if we withdraw, now we have Filipinos right now on death row because of heinous crimes like drug trafficking. One is Indonesia, others in the Middle East. And is it correct that if we will impose this, we have no more moral backing to be able to go to this country and say, save our Filipinos from your death penalty? Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. We become hypocritical, actually.
Yeah, because we ourselves have placed the death penalty. How can we ask reprieve? How can we ask leniency in other countries if we ourselves are inflicting a death penalty? And second to the last, because I'm going to end in my last 30 seconds. If we impose the death penalty, there will be repercussions on our trade agreements, correct? And the GPS, the General Scheme of Preference Plus, under the EU, which gave many of our products preferential treatment on tariffs, will be withdrawn. Is that the effect of a death penalty on the GSP Plus under the EU?
Yes, Your Honor, because when we applied for the benefit, we said that we will follow the commitments that we have ratified and joined, and part of that is the Iccpr, Your Honor. And we are
yes, and finally, the last 15 seconds. We all agree and accept that we are in a pandemic and people are dying. And right now we have, yesterday, more than 6,000 COVID-19 positives. And therefore, this is really a grave situation as far as life is concerned in our country. And we, of course, are working hard to preserve life in our country under this pandemic. And therefore, don't you agree that at this time, if we will reimpose the death penalty, will exacerbate our situation, so that during these times when people are dying, we are going to reimpose death, that more people will die during these times. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Your Honor. We have not only lost lives, but we have lost livelihoods also, and this will exacerbate it, certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I'd like to thank Commissioner Dompit, and therefore I would like to thank Chairman for allowing me to interpolate on on Commissioner Dompit's exposition on the death penalty and international law and our Constitution. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Dumpik.
Maraming pong salamat.
Before I go to the next interpolator, I want to questions for clarification because I'm bothered and disturbed by the cited constitutional provisions. Commissioner Dumpik, in the light of your argument that we are signatory to international convention and also the second protocol, are you saying that even without this constitutional provision on in section 2, article 2, we are bound to abolish death penalty?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ulitin ko, kahit walang constitutional provision that we adopt the general accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land, obligado po tayo na wag magpasa ng death penalty law because of the international covenant you cited and also the second protocol. Is that your position?
Yes,
Is that your position, Commissioner?
yes, Your Honor.
Tama po. Okay. Therefore, pag sinabi natin Section 2, Article 2, the Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land, magkaiba po ito sa obligasyon natin by reason of an international treaty. Ganun po ba?
Hindi ko po nakuha yung huli.
Ganito po. Our being party to an international convention is one thing. Our adopting that international convention kahit wala tayong treaty or kahit hindi tayo signatory, iba yon, di ba? So that even, ang punto ko po, kahit wala po itong provision ng Section 2, Article 2, that we adopt the general accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land, obligado po tayo na wag magpasa ng death penalty law dahil signatory tayo sa international convention. Yun po ba?
Opo, we are a member of the United Nations, founding member. Miyembro din po tayo ng Human Rights Council. Obligasyon po natin yon.
Okay. Therefore, sinusundan ko lang po ang punto kasi ni Chairman Rufus Enrique. Yung sinabi niya citation Section 2, Article 2, that we adopt the general accepted principles of international law, hindi yun po ang tumbok dito kung hindi dahil sa we are party to an international convention saka protocol, second protocol. Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Pag sinabi natin the Philippines adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land, that has to be perceived as adoption of a generally accepted principle of international law dahil wala tayong treaty, hindi tayo signatory. Kasi dalawa ang tingin ko niyan eh. I-adapt mo ang isang bagay dahil hindi pa sa'yo yung bagay na yan. On the other hand, kung nasa iyo na yon yung bagay na yan, if you're already a party to a particular contract, hindi mo na kailangan i-adapt yan. Kasi signatory ka na mismo, di ba?
Opo.
Okay. So, ang tanong ko na lang po doon sa generally accepted principles of international law, which we have adopted by force of Section 2, Article 2 of the Constitution, ito po ang talagang generally accepted principles of international law because ang mga, lalo na yung mga Big Five sa United Nations, sila po ang nag-i-implement ng mga batas ng United Nations eh. Di po ba? Halimbawa, Russia, China, US. Signatory po ba ang Russia sa International Convention na yan? Second Protocol? Hindi.
We can double check po, Your Honor. I don't have that information.
US, ang alam ko, may death penalty sila doon. Maraming executions doon. China, maraming executions. Sa US, may mga executions. Marami din, ibang states nila. Singapore dito sa Asia, Japan, Pilipinas lang po ang walang death penalty. Meaning, mahirap naman natin sabihin na i-adapt natin ang generally accepted principles of international law kung ito mga bansa na dapat mag-i-implement ng United Nations laws, hindi mismo signatory. So I cannot accept as a proposition na sakop po ito ng Section 2, Article 2, General Accepted Principles of International Law dahil magkaiba yun sa tratado na pinasukan natin. Next question, I hope this will be the last. Sabi po ninyo in answer to the question of the Honorable Rodriguez, Congress cannot opt out dito sa International Convention. Hindi na pwede po tayo umatras kahit pinapatay ng mga tao natin, ng mga drug addicts, kung sino-sino dyan. Ang mali, ibig sabihin, ng isang kongreso na nag-ratify sa International Convention ay wala na pong solusyon sa kongreso ito. Kasi sabi niyo po, hindi tayo pwedeng maka-atras. This will be a perpetuation of a mistake. Parang nagkaroon tayo ng tratado which has been a case of a perpetual mistake. Yun pa ba ang punto niyo?
We are obliged to follow the commitments that we have made before the international community, Your Honor. And death penalty, as we said, is a false promise. It's not a deterrent. And solid police work, law enforcement, vigilance on the ground are better measures, Your Honor. In fact, in the Senate, they conducted a study, the CEPO conducted a study, and one of the ways by which we can have deterrence is to provide more resources to our Philippine National Police and law enforcement agencies to increase the police-to-population ratio, which is only one of the ways by which we can deter crime, Your Honor.
Commissioner Dumpit, uulitin ko po. Ako nga, baka ko bumuto against sa death penalty law. Kasi kanya-kanyang position na yan eh. Hindi maniniwala si Representative Atienza niyan. Pero ang point ko lang is, dapat o hindi dapat ipasa is one thing. Ang jurisdiction natin, ang authority natin na magpasa ng batas, ang tinutumbok ko po. Kasi pangit naman, magpapasa tayo na wala pala tayong karapatan magpasa. Ano ang ipapasa natin? Nasa mga kongresista na po yan. Ito lang ang nakakabahala because you answered a while ago two important questions ni Honorable Rodriguez na ito obligado tayo dahil sa International Convention at hindi pa tayo pwede umatras doon. One last question. Sino ang nag-implement ng United Nations protocol? International Covenant mo.
Nagmo-monitor po ang Human Rights Committee, it's a monitoring body. In fact po, by October, we will be under review by the UN Human Rights Committee, and one of the list of issues there is the reimposition of the death penalty, Your Honor. So they are a monitoring body.
Excuse me, ang tanong ko po hindi monitoring. Sino ang mag-i-implement, ang magpapatupad ng second protocol or ng international covenant na sinahit mo? Sino sa United Nations ang magpapatupad?
Yung pangkalahatan po ay yung miyembro at yung the collective that actually ratified the treaty. So it's the whole of the United Nations, Your Honor, that can address the implementation. But part of that, of course, is ourselves being a state party to these treaties. Kasama po tayo sa pag-implement po nito.
Pero ang tanong ko lang po, dalawa ang super bodies ng United Nations. United Nations General Assembly, United Nations Security Council. Alin sa dalawa ang mag-implement nito?
It could be both, but more specifically, Your Honor, there is a mechanism called the Human Rights Council. We are as a member of that. 47 or 48 state parties po are a member of the Human Rights Council, Your Honor. And they're the ones also tasked to ensure implementation of these treaties, Your Honor.
Can they ensure implementation even if there is a veto, for example, of Russia and China?
Yes, Your Honor, because their processes are different, and when they pass resolutions, like Congress, they get to vote and they have their own internal procedures, Your Honor. But normally, if a resolution is adopted and we have agreed to that, then we are also duty bound to be able to implement the commitment found in those resolutions and other treaties, Your Honor.
Sa pag-aaral ko ng international law, Commissioner Dumpit, kahit ipasa ng General Assembly, kung ayaw ng Security Council, dahil may nag-veto doon, walang nangyayari. Anyway, I will now recognize the Honorable Atienza.
Yes, just one question, Mr. Chair. To the Honorable Lady, who has been very effective. In your knowledge, would you know, and would you be able to say if America, Russia, China signed that covenant abolishing the death penalty in their countries?
Your Honor, they are not a state party to the Iccpr nor the Second Optional Protocol. So, and as we said, they still have death penalty in their policy and practice, Your Honor.
Kaya nga po, hindi sila kasama rito sa ating pinag-uusapang commitment. They never committed themselves.
Kasi hindi po sila state party dun sa treaties na nasabi.
Clarifying that question, we would like to thank the lady for your very, very steadfast standing on the facts of legal issues that we as a country have committed to. In the face of the very incisive, knowledgeable questions of the Honorable Rufus Rodriguez, you have stood your ground. Salamat po sapagkat marami kaming katulad po ng inyong lingkod, kaming mga congressmen ay kuminsan excited kami rin sa aming idea na kailangan namin yung tinig ninyo. Pero kailangan makinig kami sa inyo. Maraming salamat.
Marami pong salamat.
Atienza, we may now proceed to hear the interpellation of Honorable Franz Castro.
Mr. Chair, so isa po ako doon sa tumututol, no, doon sa imposition ng death penalty. So unang-una nga po yung commitment natin sa international. Pangalawa po na maiting sa akin yung justice system natin. So yung mga questions ko po ay tungkol sa DOJ, yung atin pong mga organization kay Attorney Chel Jokno at saka kay Attorney Nery Colmenares. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, yung DOJ po. So, unang tanong po, Mr. Chair, so sa ating DOJ, so how would you assess po sa DOJ yung ating justice system? Kasi isa sa mga argumento po ng kinatawang ito, bakit naano po tayo doon sa death penalty. Can you give a simple assessment or evaluation of our justice system in terms of ilan po yung mga nasosolve na mga cases, ilan po yung mga particular dito po sa sinasabing mga heinous crimes, ilang taon po ba natatapos ang mga kaso dito sa mga heinous crimes na mga binabanggit, particular dito sa drugs, dito sa rape or murder or whatever sa DOJ po, Mr. Chair.
Your Honor, the guideline says that we will hear first the resource persons at tamang-tama, tugma yung tanong mo, pagkatapos magsalita ng representante ng Department of Justice, si Assistant Secretary Iccpr. So, pwede po ba si Asik Iccpr, pakinggan muna natin, then the first interpolator will be the Honorable Franz Castro. Asik T.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Your Honors. In behalf of the Department of Justice, we thank you for extending this invitation to us to participate in today's hearing. Before I answer Congressman Castro's question, allow me to present the DOJ's position on these House bills. Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Commissioner Karen Dumpit, you're now excused, Commissioner. Salamat sa pagdalo mo.
Marami po salamat.
You may now proceed, Asik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Justice previously submitted 2 position papers on this matter last October 2019. In a nutshell, our position is that the Department of Justice sees no legal or constitutional impediment to Congress's reimposition of the death penalty. There are two main reasons for this position of the Department of Justice. The first reason is that the imposition of the imposition of the death penalty is within the powers of Congress, and second, the imposition of the death penalty is allowed by the Constitution. With respect to the first reason, Mr. Chairman, our position is that the reimposition of the death penalty is tantamount to the exercise of legislative power, not only to make laws governing the relations of people amongst themselves, but also between people and the government and its other agencies. And it's also tantamount to the exercise by Congress of its power to alter or repeal laws. With respect to our second point, that the reimposition of the death penalty is allowed by the Constitution, we can see this, Mr. Chairman, in no less than Article 3, Section 19, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution, which was affirmed, which was recognized by the Supreme Court in the Iccpr case. However, Your Honor, the Department of Justice has concerns with some specific provisions in some House bills. In particular, we have a concern with the House bills that propose the manner of execution to be by hanging or by firing squad. The Department of Justice believes that these modes of execution would tantamount to cruel, degrading, or inhuman punishment under the Constitution. Finally, Your Honor, we have a concern with the provision in one of the bills that allows for public viewing of executions even by minors above the age of 9. We believe that this provision would tantamount to a violation of Article 15, Section 3, Paragraph 2 of the 1987 Constitution on the rights of children to be protected from all forms of neglect and abuse. Finally, Your Honor, with respect to the issue that was discussed previously by the resource person from the CHR on the issue of our international obligations. The department, our opinions in 2019 reiterated the previous opinion by the Department of Justice made in 2017 that under the doctrine of incorporation of Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, generally accepted principles of international law incorporated into our legal system will not necessarily prevail over our domestic law. We have to be able to interpret these two provisions side by side. And in the view of the Department of Justice, even if our international obligations under treaties, even if we can countenance the position that we are prohibited from reimposing the death penalty, we must consider this in light of the power of Congress, as well as the provisions of the Constitution that allow Congress to impose the death penalty. So, Your Honor, that is the position of the Department of Justice. Thank you once again for letting us be here today.
Thank you. You may now proceed, Honorable Franz Castro.
Mr. Chair, thank you po dun sa position ng DOJ. So yung una ko pong tanong, what is the state of our justice system now when it comes to decision, resolution po ng mga heinous crime? Gaano po ba katagal? Gaano po ba karami itong mga nasa atin po na mga kaso ngayon? sa mga heinous crime. Do we have the data? At gaano po katagal yung pag-aano ng desisyon ng kaso po?
Your Honor, pasensya na po, but presently I do not have that specific data. But what we can do is that we can undertake to gather that data and submit it to this body in a later date.
Iccpr, can you provide the Honorable Franz Castro, particularly this committee, with the needed data na subject ng katanungan ni Honorable Franz Castro?
Yes, Your Honor, we will gather that data and comply with this committee's request.
Salamat.
I asked this question kasi in terms of the justice system natin, so ito nga po yung isa ko sa mga considerations kung bakit problematic ako dito sa imposition ng death penalty. Mahalaga po ito sa akin na mga data, Mr. Chair, kasi dito natin makikita talaga kung gaano po kabilis, di ba? Yung pag-aano, lalong-lalo na po doon sa ating mga poor countrymen, yung mga ating mga kababayan na mga mahihirap na nadedemanda po, lalo-lalo na dito sa mga heinous crimes. Sige po, antayin ko po yung yung data, maybe meron pa naman pong ibang time dito sa hearing natin about death penalty. Pangalawang question, Mr. Chair, in terms of yung sa pagdinig sa mga kaso po ng ating mga kababayan, in terms do sa mga heinous crimes, gaano po katagal ito? At meron bang readily available po na mga katulad niyan, yung mga PAW, yung mga, kasi alam naman natin yung mga mahihirap nating mga kababayan, Mr. Chair, umaasa lang ito doon sa ating mga public attorney's office. So do we have the personnel po, Mr. Chair, sa mga ganitong mga kaso po? Do we have enough na mga personnel po or mga abogado po kaugnay nito sa mga crimes na to?
Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Chairman, Your Honor, the public attorney's office is there, and it's mandated to provide legal counsel to indigent individuals in need. With respect to those details as to the availability of personnel to fulfill this mandate, may I defer to the statements of the public attorney's office itself. However, if needed, we can do the task of gathering that data and likewise providing it on the later date to this body.
In regard to that question, next resource person is PAW, from PAW. So siguro makakapagtanong si Honorable Franz Castro doon. Your Honor? Castro?
Sige po, Mr. Chair, medyo dismayado ko sa DOJ. Wala tayong mga enough na data. Sige, sa PAW na lang po, pwede bang matanong si PAW Chief Presida po, kaugnay doon sa tanong ko. So, ilang porsyento po ba o gaano karami po ba ang ina-attend po ng ating mga personnel sa PAW kaugnay nitong mga heinous crime at gaano katagal po natatapos itong mga kaso na to?
Honorable Castro, after the interpellation of Vice Chair Flores, kung wala nang ibang mag-interpellate si Iccpr, ang power na po magsasalita, and then doon natin i-raise yung katanungan mo.
Mr. Chairman?
Salamat. Okay, Honorable Rodriguez.
I would like to follow the interpellation after Franz Castro. I have questions to Iccpr, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Likewise, Mr. Chair, just one short question also after the Honorable Rufus Rodriguez.
Congressman Kit can go ahead because it's only one question. I have legions of questions.
Okay, so Comsec, take note of that. May we now proceed kung wala namang tatanong pang iba to PAW? Sinong representative?
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Yes, Your Honor.
May I also manifest my intention to interpellate Iccpr later?
Okay, so ganito, no? First, to interpolate itong tinext sa akin ni Comsec would be Vice Chair Flores, and then sunod si Representative Honorable Del Monte, Minority Leader. And then we'll go back to Chairman Rodriguez. Ito po ang mga susunod na mga kindly prepare, mga resource persons. After PAW, we will have PNP. Next is IDP. The next is Flag Chair Chel Jokno. Then NUPL Chair Neri Colmenares. Then Karapatan Representative Roneo Clamor. Magandaan na po. So, Vice Chair Flores. Comsec, si Vice Chair Flores ang susunod na mag-interpolate kay ASECT.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just have a few questions for ASECT. Mr. ASECT, if you were given if the DOJ is given the opportunity to choose between having more police officers on the ground or the reimposition of the death penalty, what would the DOJ choose?
Your Honor, it's a difficult question to answer because that's Your Honor, do we have to choose, Your Honor?
If you were given the choice, okay. If the purpose here is deterring crimes related to drugs, what would be a bigger deterrent? Would it be having the death penalty reimposed, or would it be having more police officers on the ground?
Your Honor, I'm not in a position to give an answer that's well thought of. But I would think that more police officers on the streets would be an immediate way to address law and order. So it's in general, it's more immediate. It's right there. It's right there among us. The death penalty is more of a remedial measure that hopefully would deter criminals from pursuing criminal acts.
Okay, now given the intense implementation of the Tokhang program of the government, would you say that the Tokhang, as it is, made an impact on the proliferation of drugs or drug-related cases in the Philippines?
Your Honor, we don't have. I don't have the statistics right now to back that. We are in the process of gathering statistics to show if indeed the war against drugs has fulfilled its law and order mandate. But I think judging from the support given by people to President Duterte on this particular topic, I would say that there is an effect on law and order.
Okay, so now both situations I asked ASECT had nothing to do with the reimposition of the death penalty. Yet on both questions that I made mention of, your answers were both on the affirmative that these programs or the additional police forces and the Tokhang program had in one way or another made an impact on against the drugs. No? And most of the bill spending right now is for the imposition of the death penalty with regards to drug cases. Now, if we were to go back to having the death penalty and have these bills approved, my question then is, why wouldn't we just focus on the programs that you said have in one way or another made an impact on the drug cases in the Philippines, rather than go to a more extreme measure of having the death penalty be imposed.
Your Honor, death penalty would give prosecutors more leeway. They would give them a more powerful tool to perform their function of prosecuting criminals.
Okay. Well, thank you, Asakti. That will be all, Mr. Chair.
Next is the Honorable Minority Leader Belmonte.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To my batchmate, I will just ask the same question I propounded to CHR Commissioner Dumpit, and I think I hope I get a satisfactory answer in this. Nung tinatalakay po natin ang anti-terror law, isa po ang DOJ sa main proponents na nagtutulak na kailangan po natin ipasa ang anti-terror law kasi magiging in default tayo ng international obligations po natin. This time, they are saying na, teka, hindi naman tayo obligado kahit kung na to, international convention na to, it's incorporated as part of the law of the land. Parang may inconsistencies ang executive department po dito. Ano ang basis na in one law, insisting sila na obligado tayo sa international obligations, dito naman ay hindi tayo obligado. If I may be enlightened, Mr. Chair, Your Honor.
Thank you, Congressman Belmonte. To your question, our reply is that presently the Department of Justice, we are not. The difference between the current situation and the Anti-Terror Act is that for the current situation with respect to the death penalty, we are not yet certain if reimposing the death penalty would tantamount to a breach of our international obligations. We are not certain if when we look at the language of the Iccpr and the second protocol, there does not appear to be express language that would say that we are prohibited from reimposing the death penalty. Nevertheless, even if we concede that that is the case, in this situation, incorporation of the Iccpr as well as the second protocol and the principles incorporated should be read side by side with our law and constitution. And our constitution itself allows the Philippines to impose the death penalty. And in this instance, we see that there must be some kind of interpretation, some kind of reconciliation. And the position of the Department of Justice is that there can't be a reconciliation that will result in the prevalence of international law over our domestic law and the Constitution.
So iba ang position nyo talaga sa position ng CHR, and ang sinasabi ninyo yung GSP plus status na malinaw na mawawala sa atin yon ay hindi malinaw na magiging effect sa atin pag pinasa natin ang death penalty.
Your Honor, hindi pa po kami convinced na gano'n ang consequence ng pagpasa ng death penalty.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that muna, Mr. Chair. Mahaba pa naman po ito. Thank you very much.
May we now hear from Honorable Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good noon to the Chairman, and also to our resource person, Iccpr, outstanding professor in the UP College of Law. Good noon, Professor Iccpr. You stated that the Constitution provides on Section 19, Paragraph 1, the second sentence states that neither shall death penalty be imposed unless, for compelling reasons involving heinous crimes, the Congress hereafter provides for it. Now, you're aware that our Constitution was approved through a plebiscite in 1987. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
So we have an 1887 Constitution. Do you also accept that in 2006, the Philippines became a signatory to the second protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, November 2007. And so therefore, 2007 is a more recent determination of our government and our country that there is a commitment not to execute in our jurisdiction any person convicted of any crime. Don't you agree that there is the protocol which we have signed in 2007 and which has been not only ratified but overwhelmingly ratified by both houses of Congress through 9346? Don't you agree that we have this particular protocol, a treaty that has been adhered to, ratified by our country years after the Constitution of 1987?
Your Honor, we agree that the second protocol to the Iccpr has language which says that no one can be executed within the territory of a state court.
Correct. Yes, correct. And so therefore, if you are saying that we have to reconcile, clearly, it is clear that our country has in international law already approved and has committed not to execute. So why are you saying, Professor, now that you are not yet certain that we are obliged by the second protocol as part of Article 2, Section 2, which is now part of the law of the land, that there should be no execution whatsoever in this jurisdiction? So why are you saying that you are not yet certain? The DOJ should always be certain because you are the lawyer of government. You should be certain and should be able to advise other branches of government on what should be, how to reconcile Article 2, the Bill of Article 4, the Bill of Rights, and also the Article 3, the Bill of Rights, and also the second protocol. So can we explain that? Are you still uncertain up to now, Professor T?
Your Honor, we recognize that the Iccpr actually recognizes the possibility that some countries would impose the death penalty. At the same time, while we recognize that presently the Philippines is while we recognize that presently the Philippines has no death penalty, neither the Iccpr nor the second protocol have express language that says that we can't revert to how it was before. We can't reimpose the death penalty. And what complicates this situation is the fact that a view that we are prohibited from reimposing the death penalty would contradict what's clearly stated in the Constitution.
Well, I would disagree with you on that, Asek, because very clear that we are obliged in international law, commitments in international law should be followed. Pacta sunt servanda. We should follow our commitment. And in fact, this commitment was approved and ratified. And clearly, the commitment is very clear, not to execute anybody in this jurisdiction, the Philippines. Don't you also agree that because we have passed in 2006, June 24, Congress had already approved a law that prohibits the imposition of death penalty as its collective sense, both houses of Congress, and also in compliance, in ratification to what we have adhered to in the Iccpr and the second protocol. Don't you agree that this, again, later in time, 2006, and our Constitution 1987. So therefore, the Section 19, Paragraph 1, does not anymore hold as far as the present status of our law is. Because not only do we have a national law, but we also have an international law which has been adopted by incorporation in our Constitution. Don't you agree with that, Asek T?
Your Honor, we unfortunately we have to disagree because we can't adopt a position that would imply that our constitution can be amended by treaties or convention.
It is part of the law of the land, so it's a reconciliation. Reconcile both provision at this stage now, because we are signatories of 2007. That is now the present commitment that we have to the international community. Now, another question here, Asek T. You had your provisions, you have your position in 2017, correct? Which is submitted on death penalty, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
How many? There were two papers you submitted to 17, and
there was one in 2017, and there were two in 2019, Your Honor.
Yes. And when these were submitted, the Philippines was not yet affected by COVID-19 pandemic, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And now we see a changed situation when our people are dying, and the thought of reimposing death penalty at this time when people are dying and we are preserving precious lives of Filipinos. Don't you think that the repercussion in having death penalty in these days of the days of COVID-19 contamination and death of our fellow citizen will make our secretary, will make our Department of Justice rethink his position to, at this time, again, trying to reimpose a death penalty during these times of COVID-19 pandemic, when all our energies are to protect our people, and now we're going to say, okay, let us kill those who are involved in drugs. So did you agree with that?
Your Honor, that's an aspect that we haven't looked into yet, Your Honor. You're correct that our position papers were made prior to the occurrence of the pandemic.
Yes. And would you agree also that going now to the constitutional provision on compelling reasons involving heinous crimes, in international law, is it not that the definition of heinous crimes on many conventions in the international law, drugs, violation of drug laws, is not a heinous crime? Would you agree with that?
Your Honor, I'll have to look into that on the international law definition of heinous crime.
Yes, there are many conventions on heinous drugs, and certainly it is not a heinous crime. And are you also aware that we are a signatory to the United Nations Convention on Illicit Travel of Narcotic Drugs and the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs? Do you know that we are signatories of these two conventions?
Yes, Your Honor, we are aware. We are aware that we are party to those conventions.
We are parties to the convention. And are you not aware also that in these conventions, which we are parties, these conventions provide only for imprisonment or deprivation of liberty, and has not allowed the imposition of death penalty. And we are signatories to this. Don't you agree that we should be able again to be able to fulfill our commitments in these two conventions on narcotics and drugs?
Your Honor, we agree. We agree that we have obligations to those conventions, but we are not certain if our obligations to those conventions amount to the extent of a prohibition to the reimposition of the death penalty.
Yeah. So when can you be certain? Because we are left hanging. The Department of Justice gives the advice. When can you be certain that either we have to comply with the Iccpr, the second protocol, and then you have to be certain that the UN Convention on Illicit Travel of Drugs and the Single Convention of Narcotics Drugs, when can you be certain so that we will be able to decide? Those members of the committee will be voting after discussions and hearing everyone that are stakeholders on this, and including we would be asking the chairman to invite the Department of Foreign Affairs because of the international repercussions. Also, the Integrated by the Philippines with its president, Egon Canyosa, to invite also the flag all those who are very much have a position on this. When can you be certain so that we can guide us on this particular four treaties that have made us and compelled us not to execute any Filipino at all of this particular treaties. When can we have that?
Okay. Your Honor, for the latter two treaties that you mentioned,
yes.
The view of the Department of Justice is that it does not result in a prohibition on the reimposition
So you
of
are
the
not
death
saying
penalty.
you are not certain.
For the latter two, Your
You
Honor.
changed already. So in a matter of seconds, there's no certainty. After you said that you are uncertain, you are not certain for the two. Okay, let's proceed. It is your testimony. So let us proceed to the other two. Iccpr and second protocol.
Your Honor, for the other two, language says that the Iccpr and the second protocol prohibit imposition of death penalty. However, they also recognize that some countries can impose the death penalty.
But some countries, because they are not signatories, Russia, China, not signatories, so they are not bound by this law. But for those signatories, I cannot see any country signatories that have reimposed or continue with that penalty. But can we therefore ask you to come out with another position paper to have more certainty? You have already seen our what we have. Well, we have 4 treaties that we have discussed. Can you discuss each and every one? Can you submit? When can you submit a position paper on these particular points?
We'll discuss, Your Honor, but if there's a next hearing, we'll prepare it by the next hearing.
Okay, so we'll have that. But I have other questions to you. You are also aware, Professor T, that we have the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. And certainly in determination of treaties, clearly, the treaty itself should provide for opting out. In other words, to terminate it. Don't you agree that all of these conventions, the 4 treaties, there are no opt-out provisions?
I'll have to check the language of the treaties, Your Honor, and we'll reflect that in our next position paper.
And in the Vienna Convention, it is clear that you can only opt out if there's an opt-out provision. But here there's none because don't you agree that this prohibition on death penalty implemented in now 147 countries of the 192 countries of the world? This convention that has been signed by over 147, don't you think that aside from it becoming a generally accepted principle of law because it has been put into treaties, has reached a higher level of customary international law?
Your Honor, we cannot say that it has attained the level of customary international law. We know that customary international law requires both state practice and opinion juris. And while there is majority of states are party to this treaty, the fact is many states, there still remain states and very significant states who are not party to this treaty. And that may be an argument to say that the requirement of state practice has not been attained. At the same time, it's also an argument to say that opinion juris does not exist for this particular customary international norm.
Well, I disagree because this particular provisions in the Iccpr goes back to the 50s, and then the second protocol 2007. It has evolved through time, and the adherence of most of the countries, especially the countries that are known to be more developed, countries that have their jurisdiction, their legal, their judicial system being advanced, practically adopted this, except for authoritarian countries. Is the Philippines, Iccpr, an authoritarian country?
Your Honor, we are a democratic republic, Your Honor.
We are a democratic because under Section 1 of Article 2, sovereignty, we are a republican state and sovereignty resides in the people and all government authority emanates from them. So we are not part of those other countries that are still executing, which are not democratic and there is no rule of law. There is no constitutionalism. And of course, having a constitution, you very well know as a professor, does not mean that you have a constitution. Russia has a constitution. China has a constitution, but they have no constitutionalism because their judicial organ, the main Supreme Court, cannot question the acts of state. So they have a constitution without constitutionalism. Don't you agree with that?
I'll have to look into their constitutions, Your Honor.
Yes, they have constitution. But the problem is the Supreme Court of China cannot overrule the rulings of the Communist Party of China. So also with Russia, this seems to be democratic because they have constitution, but they have a constitution, but there is no constitutionalism. Constitutionalism only applies when we have an independent judiciary that can check and balance the executive and the legislature. So then we go now to, I would like to ask you, because we talked about repercussion. We don't want our country to be a rogue state, correct? We don't want our country to be known as, here is a country who has committed 4 times not to impose the death penalty, now is reneging on its commitment by now reimposing the penalty. Do you agree with that? That we will be a rogue state if we will pass a reimposition law, considering that we have signed and ratified 4 treaties.
Your Honor, the Philippines is still in a position to argue against being a rogue state because we can always cite that our constitution, there is an inconsistency between that perceived norm and what's provided for in our constitution.
But we approve, we signed this particular treaties that knowing that we had a constitutional provision. And these were later, these enactments, these particular treaties were signed after the Constitution. So clearly we cannot say that, our Constitution says that it can be imposed, compelling reasons for any step. But we have already made our policies by signing this. And so therefore, the being a rogue state, being a pariah in the Committee of Nations would mean that you have signed an international convention which has taken effect because there are ratifications as required by the convention, and now you are going to say, we are not going to comply with these treaties, international treaties, and we are changing our mind. So that is the definition of being a pariah, a rogue state who do not follow commitments to the international law. Don't you agree with that?
Honor, we disagree that reimposing the death penalty would result in us becoming a rogue state, because we have arguments. So there are justifications on our part to do this.
Well, we also would respect your opinion, but any internationalist, any professor of international law would have to tell you that you are bound unless you're out of the convention, out of the treaty, you cannot. And there will be sanctions from other members of the Community of Nations who will see you as a violator of what you have agreed upon, what you have committed to. And so therefore, certainly, clearly, that if we reimpose this, we will be a rogue state who do not follow our own commitments in the international community. And also, don't you think that with the Secretary of Justice involved in the request, and of course having justice to our Filipina facing death row in Indonesia? Is it not the Department of Justice, in coordination with the DFA, and likewise petition Indonesia not to impose the death penalty on a Filipina now in death row in Indonesia?
I have no personal knowledge if we are involved on this particular matter.
I think you are involved because this is a matter of justice. We're trying to get our witnesses, and we're trying to get also the our Filipina to come here to testify against those who recruited her to have the bringing drugs to Indonesia. Now, don't you think that if we pass this particular provision, we will be what is termed by the Human Rights Commission as we will be hypocritical. We have no leg to stand on because we ourselves will be reimposing death penalty. And how can we ask countries for leniency? There have been instances that we have also in the Middle East, and they're also in now in Indonesia. And how can we be able to get them be freed on leniency when we ourselves will be imposing it if this law becomes imposable again? Don't you see that this will be another repercussion against our Filipinos abroad?
Your Honor, we concede that it may be more difficult to negotiate if we reimpose the death penalty. However, we believe that it shouldn't prevent us from doing so. We can always cite other reasons. I think we just have to do a better job of negotiating for the life of our countrymen, Your Honor.
But how can you do that? How can you negotiate with President Widodo there? That you free Filipina from death penalty. She's into drugs. When here in the Philippines, if we impose the death penalty, we're imposing also death penalty. So it will, no matter what kind of persuasive, you cannot anymore because you are now imposing your death penalty in the Philippines. We can only ask that because we are not imposing death penalty. Now, don't you also agree, being our lawyer or the government, that we will lose a lot in international preferences if we are going to impose this? How about the EU GSP Plus, which gives a lot of our products preferential tariffs in entering an EU? EU has 27 member countries, and what will happen to our businessmen, to our own entrepreneurs who are now exporting these products, especially now, especially now when our companies, when our sector, the business sector, are reeling because of COVID-19. They cannot even be able to have production as much as they want to because of the ECQ, and so forth. So this will again put hardships not only to the businessmen exporting to the EU. The EU is, of course, third in our trading partner after US, China is third because it's 27 countries combined: Great Britain, France, Italy, Spain, all of those. And so if we are going to implement this, we lose the GSP. What happens to our business sector who have been giving these tariffs to be able to continue their businesses and employ our own Filipinos? With this out, there will be difficulty of our business sector employing the same number of people in their businesses that would export to the EU. Can you tell us the wisdom of having the imposition of this penalty as the position of the Department of Justice, when it will affect businesses and employees?
We hope that the EU should be able to distinguish between trade concerns and concerns of and domestic law and order concerns between their trade partners.
But Mr. Asek, the EU has already considered that, and it has become there. There is no ifs and buts here. Either you have death penalty. If you have death penalty, no GSP plus. And if you have no death penalty, yes, we will have your general scheme of preferences. So there is no more way that you can convince them, because it is part of the treaty that we have signed with the EU and part of the requirement of the GSP. And so therefore, Mr. T, seeing that the repercussions are so grave, the repercussions on international law, that confidence on the Philippines by the international community as a member which upholds what they have committed for, especially death penalty, the repercussion of us unable to help our Filipinos overseas who may be charged and convicted of drugs and other crimes that will entail a death penalty, we will have difficulty, we will undermine the DFA and our country in securing the release. And also, in this matter, I'd like to therefore ask you also, we believe in God, Asek T. And life is given by God, and nobody should be able to take it. The eye for an eye, biblical, has already been, in this world of consideration of human rights. We have gone through that. The law of the jungle, lex talionis, is now passed. We are governed by the rule of men and the rule in the international community. And so the law of God, likewise, don't you agree, prohibits the taking of life deliberately and being done in the case of a death penalty. Don't you agree with that? That we are also answerable to God.
Your Honor, our opinion on this topic is limited to the constitutionality and the legality. Unfortunately, whatever our moral beliefs are not relevant to this particular to our position.
But
Your Honor.
saying that the separation of church and state, that's in the Constitution. But while there is separation of church and state, there is no separation between God and state. What is only separated is the principle of church and state. But there is no separation between our God and the state. Don't you agree with that?
I fail to grasp the question, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
The question is, our Constitution says, yeah, you're saying that you're on the constitutional issues. But then you cannot be able to help the fact that, life is sacred, given by God. And now you want us, human beings, lowly human beings, to be the one to snuff out a life of a person that goes through a process which may be tilted against poor citizens who cannot get good lawyers, who cannot get Professor T to be the one representing them. Very good, because I admire you. You have very good intellect, and we congratulate you for that. But I don't know why, in this particular case, you have a different stance. But that is understandable. We're in the executive department. But what I'm saying is that separation of church and state, correct. But there is no separation between church, between God and state. It's always there. Even our Constitution, imploring the aid of divine providence, they always have that. And so therefore, I would just like to therefore thank you. And I hope that in the next hearing, when you submit your position, you will be against death penalty. And also Secretary Guevara, because I think that is in your heart. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank ASIC T. Congratulations, that you did well. But we hope that the DOJ will be in harmony with the Commission on Human Rights and all the others who believe that the right to life is always there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the time given to me. Thank you, ASIC T.
May we now hear Honorable Zarate, Representative Zarate. For his interpellation. Comsec, pakizumin na si Representative Zarate.
Your Honor, Honorable Zarate is present, but he is not. His video and audio is turned off. Maybe we can proceed, Your Honor, to the other resource persons. We have Power.
Before that, I have about two or three questions. Let me go back to Section 2, Section 2, Article 2 of the Constitution. It says, Philippines uses war as an instrument of national policy for policies na pinag-uusapan dito sa Article 2, Principles and Policies, State Policies. Philippines announces world's arrangement of national policy, adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land, and adheres to the policy of peace, equality, justice, freedom, cooperation, and unity with all nations. Pinag-uusapan po natin dito justice, peace, equality. Okay, ASEC T. May sinasabi, particularly the Honorable, alam mo, by chairman sa Constitutional Amendment Committee, napakagaling yan, professor ka. Ayaw ko na lang sabihin na professor din ako noon. At, ang pananaw ko, dalawa po ang pinanggagalingan dito. Isa, the isolated sovereign power of the Philippines to enter into international conventions. Kontrata po yan, which becomes binding to us. Of course, hindi po ito subject sa change of or perpetuity. Kaya pag nag-change administration, pag sinabing Congress, anong Congress? Itong Kongreso po natin ngayon. So one is international commitment as a matter of policy dahil nakakontrata tayo doon. And pangalawa, yung international law which Section 2, Article 2 has adopted as part of the law of the land. Sinabi natin adopted, hindi tayo kasama pa doon. Kaya nga, ina-adapt lang natin, hinihiram natin yung international law as a part of our mga batas sa Pilipinas. Itong pinag-uusapan natin death penalty, alin ba dito nakabase sa adoption of international law as part of the law of the land or dahil partido tayo sa kontrata dito sa Iccpr at saka second protocol?
Your Honor, in sa death penalty, this is parte ito ng isang convention na party tayo. Ito yung Iccpr. Pero para sa amin, hindi na namin dinistinguish kung ano yung term na generally accepted principles. Hindi na namin hinimay yung term na generally accepted principles para alamin ko anong source ng international law ang covered dito. So far, dun sa opinion namin, para sa amin, yung generally accepted principles covered lahat ng sources ng international law.
So, ang punto nyo is, pag sinabing generally accepted principles of international law, kasama na yon ang international conventions na sinalihan natin. Ganun po ba?
So, sa ngayon, Your Honor, yun ang pananaw ng DOJ.
Well, pareho tayo nagtuturo. Pag sinabing adopts the generally accepted principle of international law, ina-adapt natin dahil hindi tayo kapartido doon. Kaya nga, inihiram natin. Pag sinabi natin international convention where we are a party to it, we do not adapt that anymore. Kasi nakakontrata tayo. There's a fine distinction between the two. Adopted general principles of international law, automatically nagiging batas natin. At pangalawa, dahil partido tayo doon. The reason why I'm pounding on general accepted principles of international law, because how can we adopt generally accepted principles of international na sinasabi nila prohibiting death penalty when sa buong Asya tayo lang may death penalty, walang death penalty. Lahat from Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, China in particular, puro sila may death penalty. How can I consider that as a generally accepted principle of international law kung nag-iisa lang po tayo? Ano po masasabi niyo dyan, ASEC?
Your Honor, doon tayo sa usapan namin kanina ni Congressman Rufus, no? Doon sa customary international law. Mukhang para sa amin, mas doon papasok to. Parang yun sinabi mo na may madaming mga ibang bansa sa region natin na may death penalty pa rin. Ito ay argument, no? Argument against the position na the prohibition on the death penalty has amounted to customary international law.
If you are a representative, kasama ka namin sa Kongreso, will you adapt as policy ng ating bansa yung death penalty ay yung walang death penalty sa iba if it is inconsistent with our policy as enshrined in the Constitution? Halimbawa, may death penalty tayo lang mag-isa sa buong Asia, ang iba lahat wala tayong death penalty sa buong Asia, ang iba may death penalty. Pero didiretsin ko na para may provision kasi tayo Article 2, Section 7, babasahin ko po. Kasi Congress is free to formulate its own policy for the government to follow. Congress ang naglilay down ng policy, Executive Department ang nag-execute ng policy, ang third branch of government, the judiciary, kung may question doon, sila nag-interpret ng validity ng policy laid down by Congress. Section 7 says, the state shall pursue an independent foreign policy. Kasi pinag-uusapan foreign policy. In its relations with other states, the paramount consideration shall be national sovereignty, territorial integrity, national interest, and the right to self-determination. Ito na lang national interest. Paramount po yan. China, Singapore, all other countries in Asia, meron silang death penalty as a matter of national interest. Mag-isa lang po tayo as a matter of national interest ngayon, prohibiting death penalty because of Republic Act 9346. Ngayon, pag diniliberate nito namin mamaya dito sa committee, paano magiging national interest natin ito kung ang sabi ng mga authors, especially if the imposition of death penalty will be limited only to yung talagang nasa pinakamataas sa sindikato. National interest is such na kung hindi tayo nag-drug war, hindi tayo makakapasyal sa kalsada sa gabi. Let's face it, one of the results sa anti-drug war ng gobyerno, gustuhin mo man o ayaw mo, nabawasan ng mga akyat bahay, nabawasan na ang krimen. Okay, we are not saying that lahat ng mga drug addicts ipapatayin natin. Of course, pag sinabing papatayin, hindi ang Kongreso ang papatayin yan. Ino-authorize lang ang judges mag-impose ng penalty. Death penalty doon sa pinaka matataas sa sindikato. Yun ang posisyon ng chair. Akin lang yan, personal. And lahat ng judicial process isusundin natin from A to Z. For the longest time na mariresolve yan, wala nang pakialam ang Kongreso dyan. But we are under Section 7 mandated to chart an independent national policy dictated by our national sovereignty to protect our national interest. Ano pang masasabi mo dyan, Iccpr?
Mr. Chairman, consistent yan dun sa position ng DOJ that the reimposition of the death penalty is in line with Congress's plenary power to make laws and to enact policy.
Okay, one last question. Time and again, sinasabi, huwag tayong kakalas, dapat implement natin ang Iccpr, second protocol, Dahil pag tayo nag-violate dyan, kawawa, especially at this time, ang bayan, ang bansa, dahil hindi na tayo makakahingi ng tulong, particularly from Europe. Pero sa tingin ko ngayon, mas nangangailangan ng Europe sa tulong natin. Sila, 46% down ang economy nila. Tayo, medyo hindi pa naman siguro ganon. Number two, pagdating sa pagkain, sagana tayo sa pagkain. Except sa Metro Manila, dahil hindi sila agricultural area, they are living on pullouts. Pero outside Metro Manila, dito sa 3rd District of Leyte, wala kaming gutom dito. Kasi mga magsasaka, mga isda, ang mga tao dito, ang protocol namin dito, walang lockdown. I don't think that there is anything we should worry about na hindi may bibigay ng Europe sa atin kung sila mismo ay walang maibibigay. Dahil because of the lockdown, hindi na sila makapag-operate. Mula po ang last question ko, isawit lang.
Chairman.
Matugal ba at, yes, yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Yes, Honorable Barbers. Kung hayaan natin makasagot sana si ASEC.
After the reply of ASEC.
Okay. Now, pakisagot lang po, materially relevant ba ang issue na huwag kayong susuway sa kautusan ng Europe, otherwise hindi tayo mabibigyan rather ng tulong? Kasi sa tingin ko, ano itutulong nila sa atin? Anong magbibigay na tulong? Mga planta nila, sarado. Tayo, hindi naman tayo industrialized country, pero buhay ang mga Pilipino. Ano masasabi mo dyan?
Your Honor, yung pananaw ng DOJ para sa paksa na ito, limited lang talaga sa legality as a constitutionality ng reimposition ng death penalty. Pagdating sa mga ganyang issues that pertain to trade, para sa amin, nasa Kongreso na yun kung bibigyan niya ng timbang itong concern na to.
Okay, may I recognize now Chairman Barbers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
For this information.
Just an interjection dun po sa tanong ni Chairman Veloso. Gusto ko lang, just for my education, Mr. Chair, ASEC, would you know kung ang mga member countries that are signatories to this treaty, like us, no? Those who opted out, no? Meron bang sanctions na ipinataw sa kanila? And kung meron, ano po yung mga sanctions na ginawa? Would you know?
Your Honor, presently I wouldn't know, but we can get that information for you. We can find that out for you.
It would help us a lot in our discussion and debate on this particular sensitive issue if we are given that, because one of the defense or those that are opposing the reimposition of death penalty is that they always say that we are a signatory to a treaty that we cannot opt out. As I heard from Congressman Rufus Rodriguez kanina, and I think about a week ago, Senator Gordon also said that. So I was waiting for an opportunity to ask if there's anyone here know kung ano yung sanctions na ipinataw dun sa mga nag-opt out. So dahil wala pa yan, we would appreciate if you can provide us with that information. Second interjection, Mr. Chair, if you will allow me. Kagaya po nung sinabi ni Chairman Veloso kanina, sa buong Asia, no, I think there are only 2 countries na walang death penalty, especially on crimes or drug-related crimes. No? Ito ang Pilipinas at yung Cambodia, no, sa aking pagkakaalam. I don't know if I'm correct. But since dalawa na lang po yung bansa, ang question nga, sila ho ba ay signatories din? Yung mga bansang ito ay signatories din dito sa treaty ito, pagaya natin? Would you know?
Alamin po namin, Your Honor. For the next
we would also appreciate an information with respect to that question. I'm sure you would know also if is the US a signatory to this treaty?
It does not, Your Honor.
I'm sorry?
The Iccpr, Your Honor, I believe it's not, Your Honor.
So they're not. But are they a signatory? Is the U.S. signatory to any treaty that says that they will not implement a penalty of death?
I wouldn't think so, Your Honor, because they still have the death penalty.
Okay, because a lot of states in the 55 states of the U.S. still imposes death, as we all know, no? So since ganon, so sila lang ba ang pwede mag-implement? What about us? Those that have violated has committed serious crimes in our country. Medyo sa tingin ko may imbalance doon, no? What about China? Is China a signatory?
No, Your Honor, it is not.
No, okay, they're not. Do they have a death penalty?
I believe they do, Your Honor.
That's what they do. So now, is China as a nation a signatory to a multilateral or bilateral agreements with any country, specifically with us? Meron ho ba?
Bilateral agreements with the Philippines, Your Honor?
Bilateral, yeah.
On the death penalty or in general, Your Honor?
No, in general.
In general. I'll have to look into it, Your Honor, but I would think that we would have some bilateral treaties with China.
Okay. The reason why I asked that question, Asek, Mr. Chairman, kasi po, ako po yung naguguluhan, no? For instance, no, ito pong usapin tungkol, I will deviate a little, no, from the issue of the death penalty. Kasi China, no, seems to not respect, you know, it is my opinion, seems not to respect the arbitral ruling of the United Nations on the UNCLOS or the West Philippine Sea issue. In fact, they are arrogant enough to bully and impose upon nations who are claiming ownership also of the same area, and yet wala namang sanctions na gagawa sa kanila. Wala namang pumipigil sa kanila. Saan tayo pupunta if indeed gusto natin ma-implement yung ruling na yon? We go to the UN, it seems that UN is helpless. So, Mr. Chairman, Asek, the reason why I brought this up is just because medyo confused tayo eh. Selective ba yung pagsunod natin sa mga treaties, sa mga international agreements? Sa akin palagay po kasi, if we come up with a law, domestic issuing, we come up with a law that does not in any way affect any other nations, it is our law because we are a sovereign nation. Diba? The last time I checked, we are still a sovereign nation. So, bakit ang argumento ay we do not have an opt-out provision. Kaya nga I wanted to get more information po sana. So hopefully, in our next hearings, you can provide the members of the committee with answers to those questions. That's all, Mr. Chair. Salamat po. Mr. Chair.
Salamat po. Next, nag-text si Comsec, gusto din daw mag-interpolate si Honorable Rocky Biazon, if he's still around.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. May I proceed, Mr. Chairman?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question goes to the law enforcement. Many of the bills filed, including mine, are targeting death penalty to be imposed on high-level drug traffickers, meaning the drug lords, the protectors, hindi yung nasa ground na ordinary street pusher. Because we know that it is the drug lords who are really profiting from the misery of others. So yun ang intention ng many of the bills. So may I ask the law enforcement, what makes it difficult for us to see a series of successes in our drive against drugs, wherein we are able to bag these high-level drug traffickers? Kasi kung maipasa yung batas, lalo na kung ang sinasabi nga ng mga panukalang batas, ang tina-target yung high level, paano natin ma-ensure na yung mga talagang matataas ang mahuhuli natin. When so far in our experience, hindi ganun kadami yung mga talagang nahuhuli natin. And that's why the business keeps on going. May we hear from the law enforcement, what difficulty are you facing kung bakit doon sa performance with regard to bagging, the really big drug lords, hindi pa natin nakikita? From the law enforcement, please, the PNP or PDEA if they are here.
Honorable Biazon, pwede bang antayin na lang natin yung because it's already past 12. Pag nag-present na sila, pwede bang doon na natin itanong yan?
All right, Mr. Chairman, no problem.
Okay, salamat po. Next is Honorable Representative Zarate. To interpolate. Honorable Kit Belmonte, may tanong din po. And then Representative Zarate.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to, since I was recognized by the chair, Mr. Chair, nais ko lang malagay na maging formal po yung request ni Honorable Rufus Rodriguez at request din ni Honorable Barbers na sinagot naman na okay ni Iccpr. Can we put it formally that the committee direct the DOJ to reply to those questions in writing before our next hearing? Para lang po formal. Mr. Chair, Your Honor.
Iccpr, what can you say?
Yes, Your Honor. We will comply with the request.
So, how many days would you need, Minority Leader Belmonte?
Before the next hearing, I would prefer, Mr. Chair, Your Honor.
Can you do that, Iccpr?
Your Honor, when's the schedule for the next hearing? It's not naman within the week, right, Your Honor?
Aantayin pa namin because by Zoom tayo. Depende yan sa calendar ng ibang committees eh. Okay, but anyway, there'll be an agreement once sasabit kayo.
Yes, Your Honor.
As requested, then tingnan na natin kung kailan ang deadline. Maybe now proceed to hear Honorable Zarate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me now, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, sige.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, some of my queries were already responded to by the DOJ. So as to proceed with the other resource persons, because I have also questions with the other resource persons, I will just reserve my further questions in the next hearing when the DOJ will also submit the documents required of them, if that is okay with you, Mr. Chair. I will now yield my time so that the other resource persons can already present their position on the matter, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so next is, it's almost 1. Paano ito? Suspended mo na yung meeting until 1:30 or what? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Let us have lunch. Mr. Chairman, we resume 1:30.
Yeah, lunch muna, Mr. Chairman.
Lunch muna, Mr. Chairman, 1:30.
Okay,
lunch, Mr. Chairman.
Meeting 1:30. Comsec, paki-alert yung mga resource persons because we have also a timeline. We have to finish this by 3. The administration tayo at 3.
Okay.
Salamat.
Thank you.
So, session is suspended until 1:30. Salamat po.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kain na muna.